My name is Harper. I am 31 years old, and I am a senior financial auditor. My little boy lay trembling in the emergency room, fighting for every single breath, while my own mother brushed me off with just 4 cold words over the phone. She told me, "Mom is busy, honey." But less than 24 hours later, I uncovered a financial secret so vile that it forced me to orchestrate a revenge that would completely destroy her perfect life. Before I tell you how I dismantled my family's entire empire, please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your child from the people who were supposed to love them. Drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back to the night my world almost collapsed. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric emergency room buzzed loudly above me as I sprinted through the automatic sliding doors with my 5-year-old son Leo in my arms. His chest was heaving with that terrifying high-pitched wheeze that every asthma parent dreads, and his lips were turning a faint shade of blue. A team of nurses immediately swarmed us, taking him from my aching arms and placing an oxygen mask over his tiny, pale face. As they hooked him up to the glaring monitors and started an intravenous drip, my auditor brain automatically kicked in. It is a trauma defense mechanism, I suppose. While I stood frozen watching my son struggle for air, I found myself mentally tallying the devastating out-of-pocket medical costs. The emergency room triage fee alone was at least $800. The heavy albuterol treatments, the steroid injections, and the mandatory overnight observation were easily going to add up to $5,000, even with my high-deductible health insurance plan. I had recently gone through a brutal, exhausting divorce that completely drained my personal accounts. I was already working 60-hour weeks just to keep a decent roof over our heads. Every single penny I had left to my name was supposed to be completely safe in a joint emergency savings account I had set up with my mother Brenda for safekeeping. Watching the nurses adjust the dials on Leo's machines, I felt a suffocating wave of financial dread mix violently with my maternal terror. I walked over to the administration desk with my hands shaking uncontrollably to hand over my insurance information and my debit card for the initial hospital copay. The receptionist swiped my card once, then she frowned and swiped it again. She looked up at me with a tight, apologetic smile and quietly said the card was declined. Pure panic seized my throat. I had just checked my banking app that morning, and there was supposed to be more than enough money to cover any medical emergency. The receptionist handed the plastic card back to me with a look of genuine pity. I stared at it as if she had just handed me a live grenade. There had to be a mistake. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and opened my banking application. My screen loaded slowly, and when the balance finally appeared, my stomach dropped completely out of my body. The account was practically empty. There was only $14.32 left. My vision blurred, and the loud, chaotic noises of the emergency room faded into a distant, muffled hum. Just 6 months ago, I had finalized a grueling and toxic divorce. My ex-husband had tried every dirty trick in the book to hide his assets and drain our shared accounts. Terrified that he would somehow come after the money I had painstakingly saved for Leo's future, I made what I thought was the smartest and safest decision possible. I moved my entire life savings of $50,000 into a brand new joint account with my mother, Brenda. She was supposed to be my rock. She was the one who held me when my marriage fell apart, and she promised me that my money would be completely untouchable under her name. I trusted her implicitly because she was my mother. You are supposed to be able to trust your mother with your life. I stepped away from the triage desk and leaned against the cold cinder block wall of the hallway. I frantically dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before she finally answered. I expected to hear her soft, sleepy voice asking what was wrong. Instead, I was immediately assaulted by the sound of heavy, thumping bass and the loud clinking of champagne glasses. It sounded like she was standing in the middle of a crowded nightclub. "Mom!" I gasped into the receiver, my voice cracking with desperation. "Mom, it is Leo. He is having a massive asthma attack and we are at the emergency room. They just took him back and he cannot breathe. I need you to log into the joint account and transfer the copay to my checking account right now." My card just declined, and I need his medical file from your house. I poured all my terror into the phone, expecting her maternal instincts to instantly kick in. I expected her to gasp to ask which hospital we were at and to tell me she was on her way. But the response I got made the blood freeze in my veins. Over the loud pumping music, I heard her sigh. It was not a sigh of worry, but a sigh of profound annoyance. "Harper?" she said, her voice dripping with irritation. "I am at a very important event right now, and I cannot deal with your dramatic emergencies tonight. You are always exaggerating things. Just figure it out." "Mom, please." I begged, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I am not exaggerating." His lips were blue. "I have $0 to my name, and the hospital needs the payment to process his admission. Please, just transfer the money." The background noise grew louder, as if she was walking closer to the speakers. I heard a woman laugh in the distance, a bright, piercing sound that I instantly recognized as my sister Madison. Then my mother spoke the 4 words that would permanently shatter our relationship. "Mom's busy, honey." Click. The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. She hung up on me. My 5-year-old son was fighting for his life, hooked up to machines, and my own mother could not be bothered to step away from a party for 2 minutes to save him. A profound, sickening emptiness washed over me. I stood in that harsh, fluorescent hallway, completely alone. I forced myself to take a deep breath to push the betrayal down into a tiny, dark box in my mind. I could not afford to fall apart right now. I walked back into the treatment area and found my way to Leo's curtained cubicle. The emergency pediatric team had worked their magic. The heavy intravenous steroids were finally taking effect. Leo's chest was no longer heaving, and a faint, healthy pink color was slowly returning to his cheeks. He looked at me with exhausted, heavy eyes and reached out his tiny hand. I held it tightly, pressing his warm fingers against my wet face. The immediate medical crisis was passing, but the financial nightmare was just beginning. 2 hours later, the attending physician handed me the discharge paperwork, and the billing coordinator arrived with her clipboard. Without my savings, I had absolutely no way to pay the massive release fees and the pharmacy costs for his emergency inhalers. I sat down in a cracked vinyl chair in the waiting room and did the only thing a desperate mother could do. I opened the web browser on my phone and searched for instant payday loans. The websites were predatory and aggressive, advertising interest rates of over 400%. It was financial suicide for a single mother, but I had no other choice. I typed in my social security number, my employment details, and signed my life away to a digital loan shark just to get the funds deposited into my account instantly. I paid the hospital, I paid the pharmacy, and I finally carried my sleeping son out to my car. I buckled him into his car seat and sat behind the steering wheel, staring out into the dark parking lot. The adrenaline that had kept me going all night was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. My tears dried up. As a senior financial auditor, I spent my days tracking down missing corporate funds and identifying hidden financial discrepancies. My brain naturally searches for the truth hidden in the numbers. $50,000 does not just evaporate into thin air. A bank error would have shown a hold, not a total depletion. And my mother's casual dismissal over the phone while partying with my sister felt entirely too convenient. The paralyzing fear I had felt all night slowly vanished. In its place, a sharp analytical suspicion began to take root in my mind. Someone had emptied that account. And I was going to find out exactly who it was. The morning sun felt like a harsh spotlight against my exhausted eyes as I sat in the rocking chair next to Leo's bed. I had not slept a single second since bringing him home from the hospital. I watched his small chest rise and fall in a steady, rhythmic motion. The pediatricians had cleared him to rest at home, but the heavy medical bills and the looming high-interest payday loan were a crushing weight on my chest. I needed answers, and I needed my emergency debit card right away. I carefully pulled the blanket up to Leo's chin and kissed his warm forehead before asking my trusted neighbor to sit in the living room while I ran out. I got into my car and drove the familiar route to my mother Brenda's house. The streets of our upscale suburban neighborhood were quiet with the Sunday morning stillness, but my mind was screaming with confusion and betrayal. I pulled into her long circular driveway and immediately noticed something was horribly wrong. The pristine front lawn was trampled and littered with discarded valet parking tickets and crushed plastic cups. I put the car in park and stepped out feeling a strange cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. As I walked up the stone pathway, I could see the massive wooden side gates were left wide open, revealing the expansive backyard. I did not knock on the front door. Instead, I walked slowly through the open side gates and stopped dead in my tracks. The entire backyard had been transformed into a lavish, high-end event space. A massive white silk tent covered the manicured lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from the temporary ceiling structures, catching the morning light and throwing small rainbows across the grass. There were dozens of round tables draped in expensive ivory linens, now covered in half-eaten plates of prime rib and towering floral centerpieces that must have cost hundreds of dollars each. A massive wooden dance floor had been installed over the grass, and a professional stage for a live band sat empty at the far end. Empty bottles of premium champagne were scattered everywhere, like casualties of a wild, extravagant war. This was not just a casual get-together or a simple family barbecue. This was a massive, meticulously planned production. The sheer scale of the leftover party was staggering. I walked through the quiet wreckage of the event, feeling like a ghost haunting a life I did not belong to. My shoes crunched softly against discarded cocktail napkins and dropped white flower petals. The silence of the morning stood in sickening contrast to the chaotic noise I had heard through the phone the night before. I approached the heavy glass sliding doors that led into the kitchen. They were unlocked. I slid the heavy glass door open and stepped inside the house. The interior was just as disastrous as the backyard. Stacks of rented porcelain plates and tarnished silver cutlery were piled high in the deep farmhouse sink. The smell of stale alcohol and expensive perfume hung heavy in the warm air. I walked quietly through the kitchen, my eyes scanning the counters for any sign of my mother's purse or the joint debit card I desperately needed. The house was completely silent, meaning my mother and whoever else was here were still sleeping off their hangovers upstairs. I moved toward the massive marble kitchen island. It was cluttered with half-empty glasses and discarded expensive gift bags, but right in the center of the island, resting beneath a crystal champagne flute, was a thick manila folder. The folder was slightly open, and the word invoice was printed in bold black letters across the top page. My auditor instincts flared immediately. I reached out with a trembling hand and pushed the empty glass aside. I pulled the thick stack of papers out of the folder and began to read. It was a finalized billing statement from an elite event planning company based in the city. The header on the document read, Madison and Marcus Influencer Vow Renewal Extravaganza. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. Madison was my younger sister, the undisputed golden child of our family. She had been married to her husband Marcus for exactly 3 years. There was absolutely no logical reason to have a vow renewal ceremony, let alone an extravaganza, unless it was to generate fresh content for her pretentious social media channels. I scanned down the itemized list of charges, and my jaw clenched tighter with every single line I read. $10,000 for imported white orchids, $5,000 for a custom champagne tower, $15,000 for a premium open bar and Wagyu beef catering, another $8,000 for a celebrity guest DJ and custom lighting design. The total amount printed at the bottom of the first page was exactly $50,000. The black numbers blurred together as a wave of intense nausea washed over me. $50,000. It was the exact amount of money that was missing from my joint emergency savings account. I flipped frantically to the second page of the document. It was the final payment confirmation receipt. The event planner had processed the payment in full just 2 days ago. I stared blindly at the payment method section. It indicated a direct wire transfer had been made to clear the balance. Next to the routing information, the document listed the final 4 digits of the bank account used to fund this entire sickening spectacle. 7284. I did not need to pull out my phone to verify those numbers. They were permanently burned into my memory. 7284 were the last 4 digits of the emergency savings account I had set up with my mother. The account that held the money I had bled for during my terrible divorce. The account that was supposed to protect my son from disaster. I stood in the middle of that kitchen, unable to breathe. My money did not just vanish due to a banking error. My money was not stolen by a random identity thief on the internet. My own mother and my own sister had knowingly and deliberately drained every single penny of my life savings to pay for a fake social media wedding party. While my 5-year-old son was lying in a cold hospital bed, suffocating and turning blue, my mother was drinking premium champagne paid for with the very money that was supposed to save his life. She had ignored my desperate phone call because she was too busy dancing on a floor I had unknowingly purchased. The betrayal was so deep and so absolute that it physically hurt my bones. I carefully placed the invoice back down on the marble island exactly where I had found it. The tears of panic from the night before were completely gone. A cold, dark, and terrifying rage began to spread through my veins. They thought I was just a tired, weak single mother they could easily exploit, but they forgot what I do for a living. I track down thieves, and I destroy them. I stood frozen in the pristine kitchen, staring at the damning piece of paper in my hand. The silence of the morning was suddenly broken by the heavy sound of footsteps coming down the grand wooden staircase. I did not move. I did not even breathe. The kitchen door pushed open, and my mother Brenda walked in, wearing a silk robe and dark sunglasses to block out the morning light. She was holding her head and complaining loudly about a massive migraine. Behind her walked my sister Madison, still wearing her custom silk pajamas and looking completely exhausted from a night of heavy drinking and dancing. They both stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me standing there by the marble island. Brenda took off her sunglasses and looked at me with immediate annoyance. "Harper," she said, rubbing her temples. "What on earth are you doing in my house so early in the morning? I thought I told you last night that I was busy." I looked at her, and then I looked at the invoice in my hand. I held the paper up slowly so they could both see the bold black lettering and the $50,000 total. "I am looking at the reason you were so busy, Mom," I said. My voice was eerily calm, but my hands were shaking violently. "I am looking at the invoice for a fake wedding party that you paid for using the emergency fund that was supposed to keep your grandson alive." Madison rolled her eyes and walked over to the oversized refrigerator to grab a bottle of alkaline water. "Oh my God, Harper," she groaned, opening the bottle. "Please do not come in here on a Sunday morning acting like a total drama queen. It was a vow renewal, and it was incredibly important for my brand partnerships. You just do not understand how the influencer industry works. You are always so jealous of my lifestyle." I stared at my younger sister in absolute disbelief. "Jealous," I repeated. "Jealous of what exactly, Madison? Jealous that you threw a $50,000 party with stolen money while my 5-year-old son was turning blue in an emergency room bed. I needed that money to pay the hospital. I had to take out a predatory payday loan just to bring him home because you two drained my entire life savings." I turned my attention back to my mother, expecting at least a flicker of maternal guilt to cross her face. I expected her to apologize or break down crying or tell me it was a massive mistake. Instead, Brenda crossed her arms over her silk robe and looked at me with cold, hard defiance. "Do not use that tone with me, young lady," she snapped. That money was in a joint account with my name on it, which means I had every legal right to access it. "And let us be completely honest here, Harper. You owed me that money anyway." My brain simply could not process what she was saying. "I owed you," I whispered. "For what?" Brenda scoffed and leaned against the marble counter. "For the 3 years you lived under my roof after college." She said smoothly, "You lived here rent-free while you studied for your accounting exams. You ate my food and used my utilities. I never charged you a dime back then. Consider this payback for everything I provided for you when you were getting on your feet. You have a great job now. You can just earn it back. It is not the end of the world." The sheer audacity of her statement felt like a physical blow to my chest. 8 years ago, she had begged me to stay home to keep her company after my father passed away. She had explicitly told me to save my entry-level salary and not worry about rent because the house felt too empty without him. I'd even paid the property taxes for her 2 years in a row just to be helpful. And now she was retroactively charging me $50,000 for sleeping in my own childhood bedroom just so she could justify stealing my money to fund Madison's vanity project. I looked from my mother to my sister. Madison was nodding in agreement, scrolling through her phone as if my financial ruin was completely boring to her. "You forged my signature on a wire transfer, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That is a federal crime. You left my child to suffocate so Madison could take pictures in a custom dress." Madison slammed her water bottle down on the counter. "Stop weaponizing Leo's asthma to make us feel bad," she yelled. "You always use your kid as a shield whenever you want to play the victim. You are just bitter because your own marriage failed, and you want to ruin my happiness. You could not keep your own husband, so you cannot stand to see me celebrating my perfect marriage with Marcus. You are pathetic, Harper. You really are. Just leave. We have a massive cleanup crew arriving in an hour, and you are ruining our morning." I stood there letting their toxic words wash over me. In the past, this would have been the exact moment where I broke down sobbing. I would have argued and pleaded and begged them to see my side. I would have exhausted myself trying to make them understand the depth of my pain. But as I looked at the two women standing in front of me, I realized something profound. You cannot negotiate with people who lack a basic human conscience. Tears would not work here. Logic would not work here. Family loyalty was a concept they only used to manipulate me and never to protect me. They did not see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as a resource to be drained and discarded whenever it suited their selfish needs. The hot tears that had been pricking the corners of my eyes instantly dried up. The desperate, terrified mother inside of me stepped back, and the senior financial auditor stepped forward. As an auditor, I destroy corporate fraudsters for a living. I dismantle complex financial webs and expose the people hiding behind them. My mother and sister had just handed me the easiest audit of my entire career. My mind became a cold, sterile room. I did not scream. I did not throw the invoice at them. I did not say another word. I carefully folded the catering invoice and the wire transfer receipt and slipped them into my purse. Brenda and Madison watched me with confused expressions, clearly expecting a massive screaming match. They were ready for a fight fueled by emotion. They were not ready for a war fueled by data. I turned around and walked out of the kitchen in absolute dead silence. I did not slam the heavy glass door behind me. I walked across the destroyed lawn, past the empty champagne bottles and the wilted imported orchids. I got into my car and locked the doors. As I put the key in the ignition, I looked back at the sprawling suburban house one last time. They thought they had won. They thought I would just go back to my apartment and cry about my stolen money while working 60-hour weeks to pay off my new debt. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood. The emotional part of my grieving was officially over. The analytical destruction of their entire lives was about to begin. I did not drive back to my apartment to check on my son. My trusted neighbor had already texted me that Leo was sleeping soundly. The immediate danger to his physical health had passed, but the threat to our survival was now absolute. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. I drove straight past my freeway exit and headed into the downtown financial district. It was a Monday morning, and the heavy city traffic crawled at a miserable pace, but my mind was moving at lightning speed. I was no longer the weeping mother begging for help on the phone. I was a senior financial auditor, and my mother had just committed a massive, unforced error. She assumed that because her name was on the joint account, she could simply take the money without consequence. But she did not understand the intricate architecture of banking security, and she certainly did not understand the federal laws governing wire transfers. I parked my car in the garage adjacent to the main branch of my bank. I walked through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped into the cool, quiet marble lobby. I bypassed the long line of customers waiting for the standard tellers and walked purposefully toward the glass-enclosed offices reserved for branch management. A young associate tried to intercept me, asking if I had an appointment, but I simply held up my corporate identification badge. I told him I was a senior financial auditor conducting an emergency personal fraud investigation, and I needed to speak with the branch manager immediately. My tone left absolutely no room for debate. Soon, I was sitting in a heavy leather chair across from a man named David. I placed my driver license on his polished mahogany desk. I need the complete wire transfer logs and authorization documents for the $50,000 transaction that cleared my joint savings account last Thursday, I said flatly. David frowned and began typing on his keyboard. He tried to offer me the standard corporate platitudes explaining that wire transfers are generally final, and that joint account holders have equal access to funds. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his desk, and cut him off completely. David, I audit multinational financial institutions for a living. I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch. Do not read me the customer service script. I know exactly how these accounts are structured. Pull the authorization file right now. He swallowed hard and clicked his mouse a few times. The printer in the corner of his office whirred to life and spit out 3 pages of documentation. He gathered the papers and slid them across the desk toward me. I picked them up and scanned the top sheet. It was the standard wire transfer request form initiated in person at a suburban branch near my mother's house. The beneficiary was listed as the Luxury Event Planning Company. But it was the second page that made my heart pound with a dark, triumphant rhythm. When I originally set up this joint account to protect my money from my ex-husband, I had implemented a specific security threshold. Any withdrawal or transfer exceeding $10,000 required the physical signatures of both account holders. It was a standard fail-safe designed to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral theft. I stared at the bottom of the authorization form. There on the signature line right next to my mother's frantic looping handwriting was my own signature. Or rather, it was a very clumsy attempt at my signature. My mother had actually forged my name on a binding bank document to authorize the release of $50,000. She had not just emptied an account she shared with me, she had committed textbook wire fraud. And because the receiving bank for the event planner was located across state lines in New York, she had just committed a federal crime. The sheer stupidity of her arrogance was staggering. She thought my signature would be a simple formality, a minor hurdle she could just sketch her way over. She had no idea she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her. This signature is a forgery, I said, sliding the paper back toward David and pointing at the sloppy ink. I was at my corporate office during the time this transfer was initiated. I have badge swipe logs and network login records to prove I was nowhere near that suburban branch. I want this wire reversed immediately, and the funds restored to my account. David looked at the signature and then looked up at me, his face pale. I am incredibly sorry, he said, his voice shaking slightly, but I cannot unilaterally reverse a cleared wire transfer of this magnitude simply based on a claim of forgery. Because the other account holder initiated it in person, we have to follow strict federal protocols. I need you to file an official police report for identity theft and fraud. Once you bring me the police report, our fraud department will launch a formal investigation and attempt to claw the money back. I stared at him, processing the bureaucratic reality of the situation. He was right, of course. That was the standard legal procedure. But going to the police right now would trigger an immediate investigation. The police would contact my mother. It would tip her and Madison off that I knew about the forgery and that I was coming for them. If they panicked, they could easily hide their other assets, destroy digital evidence, or worse, Madison could make good on her unspoken threats to ruin me in other ways. I could not risk my son just to get my money back quickly. I needed them to feel completely safe and victorious. I needed them to believe I had simply given up. I needed much more leverage before I dropped the hammer. I reached across the desk and took the copies of the wire transfer documents, folding them neatly and placing them into my purse. "I will get the police report," I told David, standing up from the leather chair. "But I need you to freeze the account immediately, so no further transactions can occur." He nodded rapidly, agreeing to lock the account. I walked out of his office and back through the quiet marble lobby of the bank. I stepped out into the bright, noisy city street. I had the absolute proof of my mother's federal crime sitting in my bag, but one crime was not enough. If they were reckless enough to forge a bank wire for a party, they were hiding much darker financial secrets. It was time to dig deeper. I walked out of the bank and stepped into the bustling city street, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. The blind panic that had consumed me in the emergency room the night before was entirely gone. In my profession as a senior financial auditor, we have a very specific saying about financial fraud. There is never just one cockroach in the kitchen. When someone crosses the psychological line to commit a federal crime like wire fraud, they rarely start with a sudden $50,000 theft. That kind of profound arrogance is built over a long period of time. It is practiced and refined. My mother had forged my signature on that bank document with the casual, unbothered confidence of someone who had definitely done it before. I walked back into the concrete parking garage and sat in the driver's seat of my car. I closed the door and locked it, shutting out the noise of the city traffic. I did not turn the key in the ignition. Instead, I reached into my heavy leather work tote and pulled out my laptop. I placed it on the steering wheel and connected it to the mobile hotspot on my phone. The digital clock on my dashboard read 10 in the morning. My boss thought I was taking a personal day to care for my sick son. Little did he know, I was about to conduct the most important and devastating audit of my entire life. My mind went straight to the only other major asset my mother and I shared, the sprawling suburban house where I grew up. When my father passed away from a sudden heart attack 8 years ago, he left a very specific and ironclad will. My father was a brilliant and pragmatic man who always worried about my mother's reckless spending habits and her obsession with keeping up appearances. To protect my future, he left exactly 50% of the house's equity to me and 50% to her. The deed was legally restructured so that neither of us could sell the property or borrow against it without the explicit written consent and physical signature of the other person. I had always viewed that house as my ultimate financial safety net. It was a fully paid-off property sitting in a highly desirable neighborhood with excellent public schools. I had planned to eventually use my portion of the equity to send Leo to a top-tier university, so he would never have to take out student loans. I had trusted my mother to live in the house and maintain it while I paid the annual property taxes just to help her out. I opened my web browser and navigated directly to the county clerk's public real estate database. This is a public record system that anyone can access if they know exactly where to look and how to interpret the data. Most people find navigating municipal databases confusing, but for an auditor, it is like reading a simple map. I typed in the address of the colonial house and hit the search key. A long list of historical property documents populated on my glowing screen. I saw the original purchase deed from 30 years ago when my parents first bought the home. I saw the transfer of ownership documents from the probate court when my father died. And then, my eyes locked onto the very top row of the digital ledger. It was a brand new document officially recorded just 4 months ago. The document type was listed as a deed of trust, securing a secondary mortgage. The blood drained completely from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. A second mortgage. I clicked the blue hyperlink to open the scanned image of the official filing. The screen loaded slowly, line by line, revealing a high-interest commercial loan agreement issued by a predatory private lending firm based out of state. The total loan amount printed at the top of the page was a staggering $350,000. I could hear my own breathing echoing in the quiet interior of my car. $350,000. My mother had borrowed against the equity of our shared home without telling me. I scrolled frantically down to the signature pages at the bottom of the lengthy loan agreement. Just like the bank wire transfer from the event planner, there was my mother's signature in her familiar looping cursive ink. And right next to it, sitting on the line designated for the CO owner, was my name written in that same clumsy forged handwriting. But this time, it was not just a simple piece of bank paper that could be disputed internally. This was a legally binding real estate document recorded by the government. To process a mortgage of this massive size, the signatures had to be notarized by a state-licensed official who swears under oath that they verified the identity of the signers. I zoomed in on the circular notary stamp located at the bottom corner of the page. The stamp belonged to a woman named Patricia. I knew exactly who Patricia was. She was one of my mother's oldest friends from the local country club. They played tennis together every Tuesday. Patricia had knowingly falsified a state legal document to help my mother steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from me. The level of coordination and criminal conspiracy was absolutely breathtaking. They had treated my fundamental legal rights as a minor inconvenience to be swiped away with a fake stamp and a forged pen stroke. But a commercial loan of that magnitude requires a specific disbursement account. Predatory private lenders do not just hand over $350,000 in a briefcase. They wire it to a designated corporate entity. I needed to know exactly where that massive sum of money went. I switched over to the State Business Registry database and began running detailed corporate searches on my mother and my sister. It did not take long to find the missing piece of the terrible puzzle. Madison had recently registered a new limited liability company. It was listed as a boutique influencer management and luxury lifestyle marketing agency. Madison had always been obsessed with social media fame, but she lacked the actual talent or work ethic to build a real audience. So she decided to simply buy her way into the industry using stolen money. I pulled the corporate filings and the Uniform Commercial Code financing statements attached to her new business. These statements represent public claims by creditors on business assets. The private lender who approved the second mortgage on my house had filed a lien directly against Madison's new company. The paper trail was undeniable and mathematically perfect. My mother had not kept the $350,000 for herself. She had taken out a highly leveraged mortgage on my childhood home, forged my signature with the help of a corrupt friend to push it through, and then funneled every single penny directly into Madison's failing vanity business. Madison was using the stolen equity of my home to rent expensive office space, hire fake followers, and throw lavish parties to pretend she was a successful chief executive officer. They were literally financing their delusions of grandeur with the roof over my head. I looked deeper into the loan terms. It was an interest-only loan with a massive balloon payment due in just 2 years. It was a financial suicide mission designed by people who had absolutely no concept of how money actually worked. The sheer crushing gravity of my situation crashed down on me, driving the breath completely out of my lungs. I closed my laptop and rested my forehead against the cold steering wheel. I was not just missing $50,000 from a joint savings account anymore. I was now legally liable for a $350,000 commercial real estate loan that I never consented to. If Madison failed to make the exorbitant monthly payments on this massive debt, the private lender would immediately foreclose on the house. I would lose my entire inheritance from my father. My pristine credit score, which I had meticulously rebuilt after my grueling divorce, would be completely decimated. I would never be able to buy a safe home for Leo. I would be trapped in a cycle of debt and financial ruin for the rest of my natural life, while my sister posted pictures of her expensive lifestyle on the internet. They had not just stolen from me, they had shackled me to a ticking time bomb that could destroy my son's entire future. The betrayal was so profound and so meticulously planned that it moved beyond simple family cruelty into the realm of pure evil. My mother had sacrificed my financial security to fund the ego of her favorite child. I sat in the silent parking garage, letting the terrible reality settle into my bones. The fear I felt for my own future was quickly swallowed by a fierce protective rage. I was a mother too, and unlike Brenda, I actually loved my child more than I loved myself. If they thought they could bury me under their fraudulent debts and walk away smiling, they were severely mistaken. I reached for my phone. It was time to stop crying and start building my trap. I drove back to my apartment complex, feeling a heavy mixture of complete exhaustion and sharp adrenaline. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long, dark shadows across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I walked up the 2 flights of concrete stairs to my floor, taking slow, deep breaths. My trusted neighbor had texted me just a few minutes prior, letting me know that Leo was awake and watching his favorite cartoon on his tablet. I just wanted to walk through my front door and hold my son. I wanted to bury my face in his soft, warm hair and promise him that his mother was going to fix absolutely everything. But as I turned the corner of the outdoor walkway, my heart completely stopped in my chest. Standing right in front of my door with their arms tightly crossed and expressions of pure venom on their faces were my mother Brenda and my sister Madison. I froze in my tracks, clutching my heavy leather work tote tightly against my side. They were not dressed in their usual pristine country club attire. They looked frantic and disheveled. Brenda was pacing rapidly back and forth, while Madison was glaring intensely at the glowing screen of her smartphone. When they saw me approaching, Brenda lunged forward, closing the distance between us. Her face was flushed dark red, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, manic energy. "What do you think you are doing, Harper?" she hissed, grabbing my arm with her perfectly manicured nails, digging into my skin. I pulled my arm away sharply, taking a step back. "I am going inside to check on my sick son," I said, keeping my voice low and steady so my neighbor would not hear the commotion. "Move out of my way, Mom." But Brenda did not move an inch. Instead, she pulled out her own smartphone and shoved the bright screen merely inches from my face. I received an automated email alert from the county clerk office 30 minutes ago. She snapped, her voice trembling with anger. It said a public record search was executed on my property deed using your professional credentials. You were snooping into my private financial records, were you not? You have absolutely no right to look into my personal business, Harper. I stared at her. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her statement was almost comical. "Your business," I whispered, my voice thick with suppressed rage. "It is my house too, Mom. You forged my signature on a federal banking document to steal my emergency savings, and then you forged my signature again to illegally mortgage my childhood home for $350,000. You stole my entire life savings, and you chained me to a massive mountain of high-interest debt so Madison could play pretend business owner on the internet. You are both going to federal prison." Madison stepped forward, pushing our mother slightly aside. The smug, entitled look she usually wore was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating cruelty that chilled me straight to the bone. "You need to lower your voice right now," Harper Madison said, her tone flat and incredibly dangerous. "You think you are so smart because you play with corporate spreadsheets all day. But you are not seeing the bigger picture here. If you go to the police or try to blow this up, you are the one who is going to lose absolutely everything." I laughed, a harsh and bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Lose everything, Madison?" I asked. "You already took everything from me. My money is gone and my credit is tied to your fraudulent loan. What else could you possibly take from me?" Madison smiled. It was a terrifying, soulless smile that did not reach her eyes. "We can take Leo," she said simply. The world tilted violently on its axis. The concrete walkway beneath my feet felt like it was crumbling away into nothing. I could not breathe. The oxygen seemed to vanish from the humid afternoon air. "What did you just say?" I choked out, staring at my sister in absolute horror. Madison took another step closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the stale champagne on her breath. I said, "We will take your son," she repeated, her voice dripping with toxic confidence. "You are a divorced single mother working 60-hour weeks at a demanding corporate accounting firm. You are never home, Harper. You leave him with random neighbors and cheap babysitters constantly." He was just hospitalized for a severe asthma attack because you were clearly not monitoring his environment properly. That constitutes child neglect. And since Mom is his loving, stable grandmother, she has legal standing to sue for grandparents' rights. We have already spoken to a ruthless family law attorney this morning. If you try to expose the commercial loan or the bank wire transfer, I will personally call Child Protective Services. I will tell them you are mentally unstable from your recent divorce. I will tell them you are completely broke because you carelessly spent your own savings. I will drag you through a custody battle so horribly expensive and so emotionally brutal that you will completely lose your mind. And Mom will get temporary emergency custody of Leo to protect him from his negligent mother. I looked over at Brenda, expecting her to tell Madison to stop. I expected her to draw a line at weaponizing my innocent child. I expected some small shred of maternal decency to surface, but Brenda just stood there nodding in slow agreement. "It is for the best, Harper," Brenda said, her voice adopting a sickeningly sweet and condescending tone. "We just want to keep the peace in this family. You are clearly too stressed and overwhelmed to make rational decisions right now. You need to let this go, to keep the peace." Madison reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She opened the flap and pulled out a single legal document. It was a blank quitclaim deed. "All you have to do is sign this document in front of a licensed notary," Madison instructed, thrusting the heavy paper toward my chest. "It legally transfers your remaining 50% equity in the house entirely to Mom. Once you sign this, the $350,000 mortgage becomes solely her problem. You will be free and clear of the debt. And much more importantly, we will not call Child Protective Services. We will leave you and Leo completely alone. You can go back to your sad little apartment life, and I can go back to building my marketing business. You have a choice, Harper. You can either lose a house you do not even live in, or you can lose your only child." My analytical mind raced violently, attempting to process the sheer magnitude of their extortion. It was pure, unadulterated blackmail. They were holding my 5-year-old child hostage to cover up their massive financial crimes. If I signed that quitclaim deed, I would be legally validating their forged mortgage. I would be willingly handing over hundreds of thousands of dollars of my rightful inheritance and absolving them of federal wire fraud. But if I refused, they would absolutely make good on their terrible threat. They had the stolen money to hire ruthless lawyers. They had the superficial social standing to make themselves look like concerned, wealthy family members. And the family court system is notoriously messy and unpredictable when grandparents claim a mother is unstable and broke. The terrifying thought of aggressive social workers showing up at my door, questioning my fitness as a mother, and taking Leo away to place him in my mother's toxic household made me physically nauseous. They had found the one critical weakness I possessed: my absolute and unconditional love for my child. I needed time. I could not fight them right here on the open concrete walkway with my son sitting just a few feet away behind a thin wooden door. I needed to formulate a devastating counterstrike that they would never see coming. So I did exactly what they expected me to do. I broke down completely. I let my heavy leather bag drop to the ground with a loud thud. I brought both of my hands up to my face and began to hyperventilate. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let my knees buckle slightly, leaning heavily against the rough stucco wall of the building for physical support. "No," I gasped, letting hot tears spill over my eyelashes and run down my cheeks. "Please, please do not do this to me. Do not take my baby. You cannot take Leo away from me. He is all I have left in this world. Please, Mom, do not do this." Brenda looked slightly uncomfortable for a brief second, but Madison simply rolled her eyes in annoyance. "Stop being so dramatic." "Harper?" Madison sighed heavily. "Just sign the deed and this all goes away." I slid down the wall until I was crouching on the dirty ground, wrapping my arms tightly around my knees. "I cannot breathe." I sobbed loudly, rocking back and forth like a broken woman. "I cannot think right now. My head is spinning. You just told me I am $350,000 in debt, and now you are threatening to take my child. Please, I am begging you. I will do whatever you want me to do. I just need a minute to process this information. I need a little time. Just let me hold my son tonight. Let me make sure he is breathing. Please, Mom, I will sign whatever you want, but I cannot do it right this exact second. I am having a massive panic attack. Brenda looked down at me, her face softening into a sickening mask of fake pity. She enjoyed seeing me broken. She thrived on my weakness and my submission. Give her a day, Madison, Brenda said, placing a gentle hand on my sister's arm. She is a total mess. We have the upper hand here. Madison sneered down at me, her eyes filled with absolute contempt. Fine, she snapped sharply. We will give you exactly 48 hours, Harper. We will meet you at the local bank branch on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. You will bring your state identification and you will sign this quitclaim deed in front of the bank notary. If you do not show up, or if you try to contact the police, before then, my very first phone call will be to Child Protective Services. Do you understand me? I nodded frantically, wiping the tears and mascara from my wet cheeks. I understand, I whispered, looking up at them with wide, terrified eyes. Wednesday morning. I promise. I will be there. I will sign it. Just please do not take my boy. Madison shoved the manila envelope roughly into my trembling hands. Do not try anything stupid. Harper, she warned one last time. They turned around and walked away, their expensive high heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the concrete stairs. I stayed crouched on the ground, clutching the envelope tightly to my chest until I heard the heavy metal doors of the parking garage close far below. The moment the sound faded away, the tears instantly stopped. My ragged, panicked breathing smoothed out into a slow, steady, and deeply calm rhythm. I stood up, brushed the dust off my professional skirt, and picked up my heavy leather tote bag. I looked at the blank quitclaim deed in my hand and felt a cold, terrifying smile spread slowly across my face. They really thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought maternal fear would paralyze my analytical mind and force me to surrender. But they had just made their second massive, unforced error. By threatening to take my child, they had crossed a sacred line that removed any remaining trace of mercy from my heart. And by giving me 48 hours, they had given me exactly the amount of time I needed to recruit the one powerful insider who could destroy Madison from the inside out. I unlocked my front door and walked inside completely ready to start a war. The countdown had officially begun. I had exactly 48 hours before I was expected to walk into that local bank branch and sign away my rightful inheritance to protect my son from a malicious Child Protective Services investigation. But I had absolutely no intention of signing that quitclaim deed. When you are cornered by predators, you do not surrender. You find the biggest weapon available and you turn it directly against them. My mother and my sister thought they had accounted for every single variable in their extortion scheme, but their fatal flaw was their massive, towering arrogance. They had built their entire house of cards on the foundation of my sister's marriage, and it was time for me to detonate that foundation. I needed the ultimate insider. I needed someone who had the legal and financial access to completely freeze Madison out of her comfortable life before she could even reach for her phone to call the authorities on me. I needed her husband. I pulled my car out of the apartment complex and merged onto the busy morning highway, heading straight toward the downtown financial district. Madison had been married to Marcus Sterling for 3 years. Marcus was a highly successful, self-made commercial real estate developer. He was a brilliant and fiercely driven African-American man who had built his massive company completely from the ground up. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood and spent 2 decades turning a small contracting business into a multi-million-dollar development firm. His entire professional legacy and his immense wealth were built upon a foundation of spotless legal integrity and deep community respect. He sat on city planning boards and funded local youth initiatives. In the cutthroat world of commercial real estate, your reputation is your absolute currency. Any hint of fraud or financial impropriety could trigger investors to pull their funding and cause massive city contracts to evaporate overnight. Marcus protected his reputation with a ruthless iron fist. I had always wondered how a man with such rigorous standards could tolerate a woman as superficial and vain as my sister. I assumed that love had simply blinded him. But after discovering the forged federal wire transfers and the illegal second mortgage, I came to a much darker conclusion. I assumed Marcus had to be complicit. He was a financial expert. There was no way Madison could funnel hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars into a fake lifestyle agency without her wealthy husband noticing. I convinced myself that Marcus was quietly bankrolling his wife's extravagant vanity projects with my stolen money just to keep her happy and out of his hair. If he was willing to let my child suffer to fund his wife's fake influencer lifestyle, then I was going to systematically destroy the pristine public image he had spent his entire life building. I navigated through the heavy downtown traffic and pulled up to the perimeter of his latest massive project. It was a sprawling luxury high-rise development covering an entire city block. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and the loud roaring sounds of heavy excavators and steel cranes. I parked my car in the visitor zone and stepped out into the bright morning heat. I was wearing my sharpest tailored auditing suit. I did not look like a grieving sister or a terrified mother. I looked like an executioner. I walked confidently past the perimeter security guards, holding up my corporate auditing badge with such quiet authority that no one even dared to stop me. I navigated through the chaotic maze of scaffolding and shouting construction workers, my eyes scanning the site for the man in charge. I spotted Marcus standing near a large temporary field office trailer. He was wearing a white hard hat and a high-visibility vest over his dress shirt, intensely reviewing a large set of architectural blueprints with 2 city inspectors. He looked completely in his element, projecting calm, absolute authority. I stood back in the shadows of a large concrete pillar and watched him. I waited patiently for exactly 20 minutes until the city inspectors finally shook his hand and walked away toward their vehicles. Marcus rolled up the blueprints, tucked them under his muscular arm, and walked up the metal stairs into his private air-conditioned trailer. I did not hesitate. I stepped out from behind the pillar, walked up the metal stairs, and pushed the heavy door open before it could click shut. The inside of the trailer was cool and brightly lit, lined with drafting tables and walls covered in project schedules. Marcus turned around, clearly expecting to see one of his site foremen. The look of mild professional annoyance on his face instantly morphed into genuine shock when he saw me standing there. "Harper," he said, his deep voice filling the small metallic room. "What on earth are you doing here? You should not be on an active construction site without protective gear." "Is everything all right? Is Leo okay?" I stepped fully into the office and firmly pushed the heavy door shut behind me. I reached over and flipped the deadbolt, locking us inside. The loud metallic click echoed sharply in the small space. Leo was hospitalized 2 nights ago because he could not breathe. I said, my voice dangerously calm and devoid of any emotion. I had to take out a predatory loan to pay the hospital release fees because my life savings had been completely wiped out. Marcus dropped the rolled-up blueprints onto his desk, his expression shifting to deep concern. "Oh my God, Harper," he said, taking a step toward me. "I am so incredibly sorry. Why did you not call me? I would have paid the hospital bill in a heartbeat. You know you can always come to me if you need financial help." His feigned ignorance made my blood boil. The sheer hypocrisy of him offering me a handout with the very money his wife stole from me was enough to make me physically sick. "Stop lying to me, Marcus." I snapped, my voice suddenly cracking like a whip. "Do not stand there and pretend you do not know exactly what happened to my money. I am not some gullible investor you can charm with a sympathetic smile. I am a senior financial auditor, and I have spent the last 24 hours tracking every single fraudulent transaction your wife and my mother committed. I know absolutely everything." Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The warmth completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, cautious confusion. "Harper, I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, he said, his tone dropping into a serious defensive register. What fraudulent transactions? Fraudulent? What does Madison have to do with your savings account? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held zero humor. Do you really expect me to believe that a man who micromanages multi-million-dollar commercial real estate developments has no idea that his own wife committed federal wire fraud? I demanded, stepping closer to him until we were separated by just a few feet. Madison and my mother forged my signature on a bank wire to steal $50,000 from my emergency fund. They used my money to pay for that ridiculous influencer vow renewal extravaganza you hosted in my mother's backyard this weekend. The party you attended, Marcus. The party where you drank premium champagne while my son was suffocating in an emergency room. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The color seemed to drain from his face, but I did not stop. I was a freight train of righteous fury, and I was going to run him completely over. And that was just the appetizer. I continued, my voice rising in volume and intensity. They also forged my signature on a legal deed of trust to secretly mortgage my childhood home for $350,000. They took out a highly leveraged commercial loan from a predatory private lender and funneled every single penny directly into Madison's fake luxury marketing agency. They stole my money. They tied me to a mountain of fraudulent debt, and when I confronted them yesterday afternoon, they threatened to call Child Protective Services and drag me through a brutal custody battle if I did not legally sign away my remaining equity in the house to cover their tracks. I glared directly into his dark eyes, watching the muscles in his jaw clench tightly. I came here to give you one single warning, Marcus. If you do not force your wife to reverse the mortgage and return my money by tomorrow morning, I am going straight to the federal authorities. But I am not just going to stop there. I will take my forensic audit to the city planning board. I will take it to your primary commercial investors. I will personally make sure every single business partner in this city knows that Marcus Sterling built his pristine community reputation while his wife was busy committing federal forgery and extorting a single mother. I will burn your entire legacy to the ground, right alongside hers. I stood there breathing heavily, my chest heaving with the sheer force of my adrenaline. I waited for him to explode. I waited for him to yell, to deny it, to threaten me with his own corporate lawyers. But Marcus did not move. He stood completely frozen, staring at me with a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. He was not looking at me like an enemy. He was looking at me like a man who had just realized he was standing on a live landmine. He slowly reached out and gripped the edge of his drafting desk, as if he needed the physical support to remain standing. Harper. He whispered, his voice barely recognizable. He sounded completely hollowed out. I swear to you, on my own life, I did not know any of this. I scoffed, shaking my head in disgust. Save the performance, Marcus. You expect me to believe you did not pay for that $50,000 party. I did not pay a single dime for that party. He fired back, his voice suddenly roaring with an intense, terrifying clarity that made me flinch. Madison told me the entire event was completely comped. She told me it was a corporate brand sponsorship. She said luxury vendors were providing the catering, the champagne, and the flowers for free in exchange for exposure on her social media channels. She explicitly told me it was a brilliant marketing move for her new business. He ran a large, heavy hand over his face, pacing rapidly in the small space between the desk and the wall. And the business, he continued, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound betrayal. The marketing agency. She told me she secured a private angel investor grant designed specifically to support female entrepreneurs. She showed me the fake approval letters, Harper. I celebrated with her. I believed her because she is my wife. I watched him closely. As an auditor, I am trained to read people. I look for the micro expressions of deception, the slight hesitations, the defensive posture of a liar caught in a trap. But I saw none of that in Marcus. I saw a brilliant, powerful man whose entire reality was suddenly shattering into a million sharp, jagged pieces. I saw the crushing realization of a husband discovering that the woman sleeping next to him was a ruthless, calculating sociopath. He was not complicit. He was just another victim of their massive psychological manipulation. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes were dark and tense and burning with a fierce, terrifying intelligence. The shock was already fading, replaced by the cold, calculating demeanor of a self-made businessman who suddenly realizes his entire empire is under imminent threat. If Madison committed federal wire fraud and used falsified documents to secure a commercial loan, that money trail does not just end with her fake business. He set his analytical mind working just as fast as mine. We file our taxes jointly, Harper. We share corporate holding accounts. If she is laundering stolen money through her agency, she has legally exposed my entire commercial real estate firm to federal racketeering charges. She has put everything I have built my entire life at risk. The heavy silence in the metal trailer was deafening. The roaring sounds of the construction site outside seemed to completely vanish. We stood there, two entirely different people, from two entirely different worlds, suddenly bound together by the exact same catastrophic betrayal. The anger I had directed at him slowly dissolved, leaving only a sharp, mutual understanding. He was not the enemy. He was the key. Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between us. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression harder and colder than the concrete being poured outside. "Show me the files, Harper," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Show me every single piece of evidence you have. Because if what you are saying is true, we are not just going to the police. We are going to bury them so deep they will never see the light of day again." Marcus did not want to review the sensitive financial documents inside the thin metal walls of the field office, where any passing foreman or city inspector might overhear our conversation. He grabbed his heavy set of keys from the desk and motioned for me to follow him outside. We walked down the metal stairs and navigated through the dusty, chaotic construction site until we reached his massive, black, heavy-duty pickup truck parked near the perimeter fence. He unlocked the doors and we both climbed inside. The interior of the truck was immaculate, smelling of expensive leather and strong black coffee. Marcus started the engine and turned the air conditioning on high, immediately drowning out the loud mechanical roaring of the excavators and steel cranes outside. The thick tinted windows provided a dark, secure sanctuary from the glaring morning sun. I unzipped my heavy leather tote bag and pulled out my laptop, resting it carefully on the wide center console between us. I connected to the secure mobile hotspot on my phone and opened the meticulously organized digital folders I had compiled over the last 24 hours. Marcus pulled his own high-end professional laptop from his briefcase and balanced it on his steering wheel. He did not say a single word as he waited for me to begin. I started with the most direct and undeniable proof. I opened the scanned copy of the event planner invoice and placed the forged bank wire transfer authorization right next to it on the screen. I pointed to the sloppy attempt at my signature and the routing numbers that directly matched my depleted emergency savings account. Marcus leaned over the center console, his dark eyes scanning the documents with the practiced intensity of a man who reviews multi-million-dollar commercial contracts for a living. His breathing grew heavy and shallow as he processed the stark reality of the theft. Then I opened the county clerk database and brought up the $350,000 commercial deed of trust. I showed him the predatory interest rates, the balloon payment terms, and the fraudulent notary stamp provided by my mother's wealthy country club friend. I explained how the funds from that illegal second mortgage were routed directly into the corporate accounts of Madison's newly registered influencer marketing agency. I watched the muscles in his jaw clench so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He was staring at the exact digital blueprint of his wife's massive financial crimes. But Marcus was a builder. He knew that a structure this corrupt had to have deeper foundational cracks. He turned back to his own laptop and swiftly logged into the secure private banking portal for his commercial real estate development firm. He bypassed the standard operating accounts and navigated straight to the complex subsidiary holding accounts that managed the liquid capital for his various construction projects. Madison was listed as a secondary administrative officer on several of these accounts, a standard legal formality they had established when they first got married to ensure financial continuity in case of an emergency. Marcus began cross-referencing the dates of the fraudulent mortgage payments with his own corporate ledger. The silence in the truck was suffocating. The only sound was the rapid, rhythmic clicking of his fingers flying across the keyboard and the heavy hum of the air conditioning. Suddenly, his hand stopped moving completely. He stared at his glowing screen with a look of absolute sheer devastation. I leaned over the console to look at his ledger. There, running down the center of his corporate expense report, was a long, unbroken chain of unauthorized wire transfers. For the past 6 months, Madison had been systematically bleeding dry the contingency fund for the very high-rise development we were currently parked next to. She was siphoning tens of thousands of dollars at a time, hiding the massive withdrawals under fake vendor invoices and falsified material procurement receipts. But the stolen corporate money was not just going toward the exorbitant monthly payments for the illegal second mortgage on my childhood home. Marcus clicked on the routing details for a massive $50,000 transfer that had cleared just 2 weeks ago. The receiving institution was not a bank or a luxury marketing vendor. It was a high-stakes offshore casino holding company. I gasped softly, covering my mouth with my hand. My mother, Brenda, had always been obsessed with projecting an image of extreme wealth at her country club, but I had absolutely no idea she was a degenerate gambler. The terrible truth clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Brenda had racked up catastrophic gambling debts that she could not pay. To save her mother from violent creditors and complete social ruin, Madison had drained my emergency savings, forged the mortgage on my house, and then began actively embezzling massive amounts of capital from her husband's commercial real estate firm to keep the entire fraudulent scheme afloat. Marcus slowly closed his laptop. He gripped the leather steering wheel with both hands, his large knuckles turning completely white under the intense strain. He pressed his forehead against his hands and let out a long, trembling breath. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were completely transformed. The shocked, betrayed husband was entirely gone. In his place was a cold, ruthless, and highly dangerous businessman who had just realized his own wife was trying to destroy his entire life. "She used my company," Marcus whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, terrifying rage. "She used the company I built with my bare hands to pay off her mother's gambling debts. She stole from my investors. She stole from your innocent child. She compromised my entire legacy to protect a degenerate liar." He turned to face me fully, his expression hardening into an unbreakable mask of absolute resolve. "I am going to destroy her, Harper. I am going to tear her fake luxury life down to the studs and leave her with absolutely nothing." I felt a massive surge of adrenaline rush through my veins. The alliance was forged. We were no longer two isolated victims. We were a highly coordinated corporate strike team. "Then we call the federal authorities right now," I said, reaching for my phone. "We hand over the ledgers, and we let the white-collar fraud division arrest them both before the day is over." But Marcus immediately reached out and placed his heavy hand over mine, stopping me. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "We cannot just blow the whistle today. If we go to the authorities with just these digital ledgers, Madison will immediately claim that her corporate credentials were hacked or that I authorized the transfers myself to hide my own assets. She will muddy the waters. The resulting federal investigation could freeze all of my commercial development accounts for months or even years. I have hundreds of construction workers and massive city contracts relying on that capital. A sudden asset freeze would bankrupt my firm and permanently destroy my reputation before the trial even started." And worse, he continued, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "She will instantly execute her threat against you. She will call Child Protective Services the second she realizes she is backed into a corner. She will claim you are a disgruntled, broke sister trying to frame her. She will drag Leo into the system just to cause maximum collateral damage. We cannot afford a messy, drawn-out legal battle where it is simply our word against her lies." He was absolutely right. In the complex world of high-stakes auditing and corporate litigation, paper trails can be disputed, delayed, and manipulated by expensive defense attorneys. We were dealing with two women who had already proven they possessed zero moral boundaries. If they felt the walls closing in, they would lash out with catastrophic force. We needed something entirely undeniable. We needed a weapon so sharp and so absolute that it would instantly paralyze them and force the authorities to act without freezing Marcus out of his own company. We need a confession, I realized, speaking the words slowly into the cool air of the truck. We need them to admit to the wire fraud, the illegal second mortgage, and the corporate embezzlement in their own words. If we have a recorded audio confession, the federal authorities will have the direct probable cause they need to arrest them immediately without launching a blind sweep of your corporate accounts. And a direct criminal confession will instantly invalidate any malicious report they try to file with Child Protective Services regarding my son. Marcus nodded, his face a grim mask of pure determination. Exactly, he agreed. We need them to feel completely victorious. We need them to believe their extortion plan worked perfectly, and that you are totally broken. When arrogant people think they have completely won, they always start bragging. They cannot help themselves. I leaned back against the plush leather seat, my mind racing through the terrifying logistics of what we were about to do. I have exactly 48 hours before I am supposed to meet them at the bank to sign the quitclaim deed, I reminded him. They told me I had 2 days to surrender my equity, or they take Leo. Marcus stared straight ahead through the tinted windshield at the skeletal steel structure of his high-rise building. Then we use those 48 hours to build the perfect trap, he said quietly. You are going to call them Harper. You are going to put on the greatest performance of your entire life. You are going to cry and beg and tell them you want to surrender. You are going to invite them to a private dinner to apologize for your behavior. And while you are getting them to confess on tape, I am going to quietly dismantle Madison's entire financial infrastructure from the inside out. I looked at the powerful, self-made man sitting beside me, and I knew with absolute certainty that my mother and my sister had signed their own death warrants. They had pushed a desperate mother and a ruthless businessman into the exact same corner. We shook hands in the quiet darkness of the truck, sealing our secret pact. The war was officially on. I left the construction site and drove to a quiet park near my apartment. I parked my car under the shade of a large oak tree and turned off the engine. The afternoon sun was warm, but my hands were completely ice cold. I had a very specific role to play, and I could not afford a single mistake. As an auditor, I was used to confronting hostile corporate executives with cold, hard facts, but this required something entirely different. I had to suppress every instinct of strength and logic I possessed and become the exact pathetic victim my mother and sister believed me to be. I took a deep breath and deliberately thought about the terrifying possibility of losing my son Leo. I let that dark, suffocating fear wash over me until genuine tears began to sting the corners of my eyes. I made my breathing shallow and erratic. When my voice was shaking just enough, I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. Her tone was sharp and defensive. "What do you want?" "Harper," she snapped. "I told you, we have nothing else to discuss until Wednesday morning." I let out a loud, ragged sob directly into the receiver. "Mom," I gasped, my voice cracking perfectly. "Please do not hang up." "Hang. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry." The line went silent for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of television in the background and then the rustling of fabric. She had put me on speakerphone. Madison was listening. "What are you apologizing for?" "Harper, Madison," asked, her voice dripping with toxic suspicion. I pressed the phone closer to my face, letting out another pathetic sob. "I am apologizing for overreacting," I cried, forcing the words out between fake hyperventilating gasps. "I was just so scared about Leo's hospital bills and the payday loan." I panicked. But I thought about what you both said. You are right. I cannot afford a legal battle. I cannot lose my baby. I will sign the quitclaim deed. I will give you the house. Just please do not call Child Protective Services. I am begging you. I heard a soft, sickening chuckle from my sister. It was the sound of absolute victory. "See?" Mom Madison said, her voice filled with smug satisfaction. I told you she would crack. She just needed a reality check. Brenda cleared her throat, adopting that fake maternal tone she always used when she felt completely in control. Well, Harper Brenda said slowly, it takes a big person to admit when they are wrong. We accept your apology. We will see you at the bank on Wednesday. No, I interrupted quickly, injecting just the right amount of desperate pleading into my voice. Not at the bank. Please, Mom. This is tearing me apart. I cannot just sign away my father's house in a cold, sterile bank lobby. It feels wrong. If I am going to do this, if I am going to give up my inheritance to keep the peace, I need us to be a family again. I need to know you both forgive me. Can we please just have a healing family dinner tomorrow night at your house? I will bring the printed quitclaim deed. We can have dinner, talk things through, and I will sign it right there at the dining room table. You can have Patricia notarize it later since you already have her doing your paperwork. Just let us be a family for one night. The bait was dangling right in front of them. It was a perfectly crafted psychological trap. Madison and Brenda thrived on power dynamics. The idea of me sitting at their table crying, handing over a multi-million-dollar asset while begging for their forgiveness was simply too intoxicating for them to resist. It fed their massive egos perfectly. Furthermore, they wanted that piece of paper in their hands as quickly as possible to secure their fraudulent loan. A dinner tomorrow night meant they got the deed 24 hours ahead of schedule. Let me check my calendar. Madison sighed dramatically, though I knew she had absolutely nothing to do. I suppose I can make time for a family dinner. But you are bringing the deed, Harper. No games. No games, I promised, my voice small and defeated. I just want this nightmare to be over. See you tomorrow night, Brenda said sharply and ended the call. I pulled the phone away from my ear and wiped the fake tears from my face. My heart was pounding with a dark, thrilling rhythm. They took the bait completely. Now it was time for Marcus to execute the second half of the plan. I sent him a single text message. The dinner is set for tomorrow night. You are clear to move. The Trojan horse was officially inside the gates. While I spent the rest of the day finalizing the forensic audit files and preparing the fake quitclaim deed, Marcus was executing a high-stakes digital infiltration of his own home. Marcus knew his wife better than anyone. Madison was deeply vain and obsessed with appearances. If she was going to host a triumphant dinner where she got to play the benevolent Victoria's sister, she would need to look absolutely perfect. She would need a fresh blowout, a manicure, and perhaps a new outfit to celebrate her massive financial win. Marcus waited patiently at his downtown office until he saw the notification from their shared home security system. Madison had pulled her luxury SUV out of the garage and deactivated the alarm. She was gone. Marcus immediately left his office and drove back to their sprawling marital estate in the upscale suburbs. He parked his truck in the driveway and walked into the quiet, empty house. He bypassed the massive kitchen and the vaulted living room, heading straight up the grand staircase to Madison's private home office. It was a ridiculous room, decorated in soft pinks and gold accents, designed specifically to look good on camera, rather than to function as an actual workspace. Sitting right in the middle of her pristine white desk was her rose gold laptop. Madison used this laptop for absolutely everything. She used it to manage her fake influencer agency, to run her social media accounts, and to manage her personal banking. It was the central nervous system of her entire fraudulent operation. Marcus locked the office door behind him and sat down at the desk. As a man who ran a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate empire, Marcus employed some of the best corporate cybersecurity experts in the city to protect his firm. He had learned exactly how digital forensics worked. He opened Madison's laptop. She was incredibly careless with her digital security. She used the same basic password for every single device she owned. It was the name of their purebred dog, followed by her birth year. Marcus typed it in, and the screen unlocked instantly. He did not waste time looking through her emails or her social media messages. He needed hard, undeniable technical evidence that connected her directly to the federal crimes. He pulled a high-capacity encrypted flash drive from his pocket and plugged it into the side of the machine. Using a specialized software program his IT director had discreetly provided him, Marcus initiated a complete physical clone of her entire hard drive. A progress bar appeared on the screen, slowly inching its way across. While the drive cloned, Marcus opened her web browser history and her hidden network logs. He was looking for the specific digital footprint of the bank wire transfer that had drained my emergency savings. Every time a computer connects to a banking portal, it leaves a permanent IP address record. Marcus cross-referenced the exact time and date stamp of the forged wire transfer with Madison's home network logs. There it was, a perfect, undeniable match. The $50,000 wire transfer that Brenda had supposedly initiated in person at a suburban branch had actually been authorized digitally from Madison's specific laptop, using the secure wireless network inside Marcus and Madison's home. Brenda had forged the paper document, but Madison had executed the digital transfer. They had worked together perfectly to steal my money. It was a textbook federal conspiracy. The logs proved that Madison was not just a passive beneficiary of her mother's theft. She was the active digital architect of the crime. But Marcus did not stop there. He dug into the hidden folders on her desktop. He found the original draft of the forged deed of trust for my childhood home. He found text messages synced to her laptop between Madison and Patricia, the corrupt notary discussing exactly how much they would pay Patricia to stamp the fraudulent real estate document. And finally, he found the most devastating files of all. He uncovered the shadow ledgers for Madison's fake luxury agency. These spreadsheets detailed exactly how she was taking the money she embezzled from Marcus' company and funneling it through offshore accounts to pay off Brenda's massive casino debts before bringing it back into the agency as fake investor capital. It was a massive, complex money laundering operation happening right under his roof. The progress bar on the screen finally reached 100%. The cloning process was complete. Marcus safely ejected the encrypted flash drive and slipped it securely into his breast pocket. He closed the rose gold laptop and placed it back on the white desk, exactly where he had found it. He carefully wiped down the keyboard and the desk surface, leaving absolutely no trace that he had ever been in the room. He unlocked the office door, walked downstairs, and exited the house just as quietly as he had entered. He got back into his truck and drove away from the estate, feeling a profound sense of disgust and a cold, absolute clarity. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat of my car. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Marcus. It contained only 3 words: "I have everything." I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the massive weight of the past 3 days begin to shift. The evidence was secured. The trap was fully set. My mother and my sister were currently out celebrating their brilliant extortion plan, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already collapsed. They thought tomorrow night was going to be a celebration of my total surrender. They had no idea they had just invited an auditor and a wronged husband to completely dismantle their lives over dinner. I started my car and drove back to my apartment to hold my son. I needed to rest. Tomorrow was going to be a very long and incredibly destructive night. I pulled my car into my mother's long circular driveway for the second time that week. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the warm yellow light spilling out from the massive dining room windows. Inside that house were the 2 women who had completely destroyed my financial foundation and threatened to take away my only child. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the voice recording application, checked the battery level, and pressed the large red circular button in the center of the screen. The digital timer started counting upward, indicating that every single sound was now being captured. I locked the screen and dropped the phone deep into the side pocket of my leather tote bag, ensuring the microphone was pointing upward. I took one final deep breath, letting my posture slump and my shoulders round forward. I needed to look like a woman who had been entirely defeated by the crushing weight of her own life. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly up the stone pathway. I knocked softly on the heavy wooden front door. It swung open a few moments later, revealing my sister, Madison. She was wearing a stunning silk emerald green dress, holding a crystal glass of red wine and sporting a fresh professional blowout. She looked like she was ready to attend a luxury gala, not a quiet family dinner to discuss a massive extortion plot. She looked me up and down, taking in my plain work blouse and my exhausted expression. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. "Come in, Harper," she said, stepping aside and waving her hand with exaggerated grandeur. "Mom made your favorite roast. We are so glad you finally decided to be reasonable." I walked past her into the grand foyer, keeping my eyes focused on the polished hardwood floor. The house smelled rich and inviting, a sharp contrast to the toxic reality of what was actually happening. I followed Madison into the formal dining room. My mother, Brenda, was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table. She was wearing a pristine white cashmere sweater, and her expensive diamond tennis bracelet glittered under the warm chandelier light. "Sit down, Harper," Brenda commanded, pointing to the chair directly to her right. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair and sat down, placing my leather bag carefully on the floor, right next to my feet. The microphone was perfectly positioned to pick up every single word spoken in that room. Madison took her seat across from me, sipping her wine and staring at me like a predator observing a wounded animal. Brenda folded her hands carefully on the table. "Before we serve the food," Harper Brenda began, her voice dripping with artificial authority. "We need to clear the air. We agreed to this dinner because you promised to apologize. We need to hear you say it. We need to know that you understand how wildly inappropriate and dramatic your behavior was this weekend." I stared at my empty porcelain plate, letting my eyes fill with fresh tears. It was shockingly easy to cry when I thought about how much I truly despise them. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling and weak. "I am so sorry for coming over here and yelling at you. I was just completely overwhelmed." When Leo's car declined at the emergency room, I completely panicked. Seeing him struggling to breathe just broke me. I know I should not have lashed out at you, Mom. I know I was acting like a total drama queen, just like Madison said. Madison laughed, a sharp ringing sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "See, Mom?" Madison said, taking another sip of her expensive wine. "I told you, she just needed to calm down and look at the bigger picture." "You have always been so utterly hysterical, Harper. You let your emotions completely control your tiny little brain. If you had just been a supportive sister from the very beginning, we would never have had to go to such extreme lengths to secure the funding for my business. You forced our hand by being so incredibly selfish with your money." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod in agreement. "You are right," I mumbled, keeping my head bowed. "I should have been more supportive. I just want us to move past this. I brought the quitclaim deed just like you asked." I reached into my bag, making sure not to brush against the recording phone, and pulled out the thick manila envelope. I placed it gently on the mahogany table. Brenda's eyes immediately locked onto the envelope, her face lighting up with raw, greedy excitement. She reached out to take it, but I kept my hand resting firmly on top of the paper. "I will sign it right now," I said softly, looking up at my mother with wide, innocent eyes. "I will give you my entire half of the house so you can manage the $350,000 mortgage you took out. I will do it to keep the peace and to keep my son safe. But please, Mom, I just need to understand one thing before I sign my inheritance away forever. I need to hear it from you so my brain can finally process all of this and let it go." Brenda frowned slightly, her hand hovering over the envelope. "What is there to understand, Harper?" she asked impatiently. "You are signing the deed so we do not call Child Protective Services. It is a very simple transaction." "I know," I replied, my voice completely devoid of threat. "I just need to know why you forged my name on the bank wire transfer instead of just asking me for the $50,000. If you needed the money for Madison's party, why did you not just call me and ask me to sign the authorization at the bank with you? Why did you actually forge my signature?" Brenda let out a long, exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Because you would have said no, Harper," she stated matter-of-factly. "You are obsessed with hoarding your little savings account. If I had called you and asked you to fund Madison's vow renewal, you would have given me a massive lecture about financial responsibility and Leo's future. I did not have the time or the patience to argue with you. The event planner needed the final payment immediately, or they were going to cancel the floral arrangements. Madison leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and smiled proudly. And besides, Madison interjected her ego, completely overriding any basic sense of self-preservation. Mom knew my signature looks just like yours. We used to forge your name on your old high school permission slips all the time when you were too scared to skip class. It was incredibly easy. I logged into the bank portal from my laptop, authorized the transfer, and Mom just scribbled your name on the physical paper at the branch. The bank teller did not even look twice. It took us less than 10 minutes to get the $50,000. The audio recording app was currently capturing the most pristine, flawless confession to federal wire fraud in the history of criminal justice. But I needed the rest. I needed the real estate fraud. I slowly pulled my hand back from the envelope, letting Brenda snatch it away. "Okay," I whispered, acting as though her cruel explanation actually made sense to me. "I understand the bank wire, but what about the second mortgage, Mom? How did you get a $350,000 commercial loan approved without me being there? The deed requires a state-licensed notary to verify my physical presence." Brenda was busy pulling the blank quitclaim deed out of the envelope, completely distracted by her imminent victory. "Oh, that was Patricia's doing," Brenda said, waving her hand dismissively. "You remember Patricia from the tennis club? She is a licensed notary. I told her you were terribly sick with the flu and could not leave your apartment, but that we desperately needed to push the commercial loan through to fund Madison's new business venture. Patricia owed me a massive favor anyway, because I helped her cover up her husband's little affair last year. She stamped the official deed of trust and swore she watched you sign it. Nobody is ever going to check it, Harper. The private lender just wanted their high interest rates. They do not care who actually signed the paperwork, as long as the property was secured as collateral. And you took all that money and put it directly into your influencer agency, I asked, looking directly at Madison. I needed her to verbally confirm the corporate embezzlement angle for Marcus. Madison beamed with pure, unadulterated vanity. Every single penny she boasted proudly. Mom transferred the mortgage funds to my business accounts, and I have been using it to build my brand. And frankly, Harper, you should be thanking me. My agency is going to be incredibly successful. Once I land my first major luxury cosmetic partnership, I will easily be able to pay off the monthly premiums on that mortgage. You are just a boring accountant. You do not understand how much capital it takes to build a real digital empire. I had to do it. I sat back in my heavy wooden chair. The trap had not just snapped shut. It had completely crushed them. In less than 5 minutes, they had freely admitted to federal wire fraud forgery, real estate fraud, digital conspiracy, and corrupting a state-licensed official, all captured in high-definition audio. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and their desire to make me feel small that they handed me the exact rope I needed to hang them both. Brenda smoothed the blank quitclaim deed flat on the table and pulled a gold fountain pen from her pocket. "All right, Harper," she said, tapping the pen against the paper. "You have your closure. Now sign the document. We have a beautiful roast getting cold in the kitchen, and I want to celebrate." I looked at the pen, and then I looked at my mother. The pathetic crying victim vanished instantly. I stood up from the table, my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders squared. I picked up my leather bag from the floor. "I am not signing that," I said, my voice dropping the fragile, trembling act entirely. My tone was cold, flat, and vibrating with absolute authority. Brenda and Madison froze. The smug smiles melted off their faces, replaced by immediate hostile confusion. "What did you just say?" Brenda demanded, half rising from her chair. "You promised you would sign it tonight. If you walk out that door, Harper, I swear to God I am calling Child Protective Services right now." I looked down at them, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound power. "Call them," I challenged, taking a step back toward the foyer. "Call Child Protective Services, Mom. Tell them I am an unfit mother. But while you are on the phone with them, you might want to call Patricia and tell her to hire a federal defense attorney, because she is going to lose her notary license and go to prison right alongside you." Madison stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "What are you talking about?" she yelled, her voice pitching into a panicked screech. "You do not have any proof. You are completely bluffing." I reached into my bag and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, stopped the recording, and saved the audio file directly to my secure cloud server. I held the phone up so they could both see the screen. "I do not need to bluff, Madison," I said softly. "I just recorded every single word you both said. You just gave me a detailed step-by-step confession to federal wire fraud and illegal real estate forgery. If you even think about dialing Child Protective Services, I will send this audio file directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation before you even finish dialing the numbers." The color drained completely from their faces. Brenda collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest as if she had just been shot. Madison stood paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. The magnificent, impenetrable fortress of their arrogance had just been shattered into a million pieces. "I am leaving now," I said, turning my back on them. "You have exactly 12 hours to enjoy your roast and your expensive wine, because tomorrow morning, your entire world is going to burn to the ground." I walked out of the formal dining room through the grand foyer and out the heavy wooden front door. I did not look back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away into the dark night. I had the confession. Marcus had the digital ledgers. The emotional warfare was officially over. The absolute destruction was about to begin. The morning sun felt entirely different when I woke up the next day. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel the crushing, agonizing weight of financial terror pressing down on my chest. I felt light. I felt incredibly dangerous. I dressed in my sharpest black auditing suit, a physical armor for the battle ahead. I kissed my son Leo goodbye as my trusted neighbor arrived to watch him, and I drove straight into the heart of the downtown financial district. The city traffic was a chaotic blur of noise and movement, but my mind was a perfectly still lake. I was not going to my own corporate accounting firm today. I had taken an emergency leave of absence. Instead, I drove to the secure offices of one of the most ruthless, independent forensic fraud investigators in the state. His name was Thomas. He was a highly respected former federal agent who specialized entirely in dismantling complex corporate embezzlement networks and high-stakes financial crimes. I walked into his sleek glass-enclosed office and sat down across from his heavy oak desk. I did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I reached into my bag and placed my secure flash drive on the polished wood. It contained the digital ledgers Marcus had cloned from Madison's laptop, and the crystal-clear high-definition audio recording I had captured at the dining room table the night before. Thomas plugged the drive into his encrypted terminal, handed me a cup of coffee, and put on a pair of heavy, professional headphones. I sat in complete silence, watching his stoic face as he listened to my mother and my sister casually confess to multiple federal crimes. I watched his eyes widen slightly as Brenda admitted to forging the bank wire and securing a fraudulent $350,000 commercial mortgage. I watched his jaw tighten in absolute professional disgust as Madison proudly detailed how she funneled the stolen real estate equity directly into her fake influencer agency. I saw him take furious notes when Brenda casually implicated Patricia, the corrupt country club notary. When the audio file finally ended, Thomas slowly took off his headphones and let out a long, low breath. In all my years of federal investigative work, he said, his voice laced with absolute disbelief, "I have never heard a criminal conspiracy described so arrogantly and so perfectly on tape. You do not just have a smoking gun, Harper. You have the entire ballistic report and the fingerprints on the trigger." I instructed Thomas to begin drafting the massive civil lawsuits for fraud and to prepare the official criminal referral packets for the federal authorities. But I gave him one extremely strict condition. He was not allowed to file the paperwork or contact the authorities until Saturday night. I needed a strict 3-day delay. I needed the element of total surprise. Thomas agreed, understanding immediately that we were coordinating a much larger and far more devastating strike. While I was finalizing the criminal and civil strategy, with Thomas, Marcus was executing his own surgical strike on the exact opposite side of the city. He was sitting in the immaculate high-rise boardroom of the most cutthroat divorce law firm in the state. Marcus did not just want to leave his wife. He wanted to financially obliterate her. Using the cloned shadow ledgers as absolute proof of her massive corporate embezzlement, his attorneys moved with terrifying calculated speed. They immediately drafted emergency ex parte orders. An ex parte order allows a judge to freeze assets without notifying the other party if there is undeniable proof of ongoing catastrophic theft. Within hours, a private judge reviewed the digital evidence and signed the confidential injunctions. With those signed orders in hand, Marcus systematically severed Madison's entire financial lifeline. He quietly revoked her administrative access to all of his commercial real estate subsidiary accounts. He froze their joint checking and savings portfolios containing hundreds of thousands of dollars. He canceled every single high-limit platinum credit card she carried in her expensive designer purse. He did it all completely invisibly. Madison would not know the accounts were locked until she actually tried to swipe her cards. Her fake luxury empire was now entirely bankrupt. She was a financial ghost floating on borrowed time, completely unaware that her husband had just cut the oxygen line to her entire artificial life. Later that afternoon, Marcus and I met at a discreet coffee shop on the edge of the city to synchronize our timelines. He looked exhausted, but his dark eyes burned with a fierce, relentless energy. "The accounts are completely frozen," he confirmed quietly, sliding his dark coffee cup across the small table. "The divorce papers are fully drafted and ready to serve. My private security team is on standby. We just need the perfect venue to drop the hammer." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "We need maximum public exposure," I said, keeping my voice low. "We cannot just do this in a private living room or a quiet attorney office. They thrive on their pristine public image. We have to destroy them in front of the very people they are trying so desperately to impress." Marcus smiled a dark, dangerous smile. He knew exactly where it had to happen. This coming Saturday night, his commercial real estate development firm was hosting a massive high-profile charity gala at the most exclusive hotel ballroom in the city. The mayor was going to be there. Top-tier investors, local celebrities, and the entire elite country club social circle were attending, including my mother. Madison had been talking about this specific gala for 6 straight months. She had purchased a ridiculous $5,000 couture gown just for the occasion. She viewed this event as her ultimate socialite debut, the exact moment she would officially launch her fake luxury marketing agency to the wealthiest people in the state. She expects to take the stage and give a speech about building a corporate family legacy, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. She thinks she is going to secure new investors for her vanity project. I looked at him, feeling the thrilling finality of our plan locking perfectly into place. "Then, we let her take the stage," I replied. "We let her stand under the brightest spotlight in the room. And then, we take absolutely everything away from her." The guillotine was officially hoisted into the air. All we had to do now was wait for Saturday night to let the heavy blade fall. Saturday morning arrived with a brilliant, cloudless blue sky over the city. It was the kind of perfect weather that usually made people feel optimistic. But for me, the bright sunshine felt like a glaring spotlight, illuminating the final stage of my revenge. I woke up long before my alarm went off. My mind was entirely clear, and my body hummed with a cold, electric anticipation. Today, the heavy guillotine would finally drop. I got out of bed and walked into my bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection. I did not look like the exhausted, terrified mother who had stood in the pediatric emergency room less than a week ago. That woman had been completely eradicated by the sheer force of betrayal. In her place stood a senior financial auditor who was about to execute the most devastating corporate and personal strike of her entire life. I turned on the shower, letting the scalding hot water wash away the last lingering traces of anxiety. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I walked over to my closet and pulled out the physical armor I had meticulously selected for the evening. It was an immaculate, tailored black suit made of heavy, expensive wool. It was the exact suit I wore when I walked into the boardrooms of corrupt multinational corporations to hand them their final, devastating audit reports. I laid the suit carefully across my bed, running my hands over the sharp lapels. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and my highest black leather heels. I wanted to look sharp, angular, and entirely unforgiving. I applied my makeup with slow, deliberate precision, choosing a dark matte red lipstick that felt like a declaration of war. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight twist, securing it firmly at the base of my neck. I needed them to instantly realize they had fundamentally underestimated the woman they tried to destroy. My phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a secure message from Marcus, confirming the final pieces were moving into position. Across town in the wealthiest suburban district of the city, my mother Brenda and my sister Madison were completely oblivious to the massive tidal wave about to crash down on their heads. They had spent the entire morning at the most exclusive luxury spa in the area, preparing for what Madison believed would be her ultimate high society debut. Marcus had given me access to the digital tracking software on her accounts so I could monitor their movements in real time. They were currently sitting in private velvet chairs sipping complimentary champagne while professional technicians massaged their feet and applied real gold flake masks to their faces. Madison was bragging to the spa attendants about her highly successful new marketing agency and the massive gala she was attending that evening. She was telling anyone who would listen that she was on the verge of securing a $1 million brand partnership. Brenda was nodding proudly, indulging in the fantasy that her favorite daughter was a brilliant corporate mastermind. When they finally finished their extravagant 5-hour spa treatments, Madison walked up to the marble reception desk to pay the bill. The total came to nearly $3,000 for the custom facials, the deep tissue massages, the premium champagne, and the expensive skincare products she purchased on a whim. She casually reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her heavy platinum credit card, handing it to the receptionist with a smug, entitled smile. She had absolutely no idea that Marcus had set a digital timer on that specific account. He had engineered the freeze to initiate exactly 2 hours from that exact moment. Her card swiped smoothly through the machine, processing the massive charge, just barely under the wire. The receptionist handed her the receipt, and Madison signed it with the same careless hand she used to forge my name. They walked out of the spa completely unaware that they had just spent the very last accessible dollars they would ever possess. By the time they arrived at the gala, those platinum cards would be nothing more than useless pieces of plastic. They were walking dead women, financially speaking. While Madison and Brenda were admiring their fresh manicures, a very different kind of meeting was taking place in a sterile, windowless conference room in the downtown legal district. Marcus was standing at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by 5 plainclothes process servers. These were highly trained professionals who specialized in executing hostile corporate takeovers and serving devastating legal papers to wealthy individuals who thought they were entirely untouchable. They were dressed in expensive, tailored tuxedos and high-end evening gowns perfectly designed to blend seamlessly into the wealthy crowd at the charity gala. Marcus handed out thick, heavy manila envelopes to each server. His face was a grim mask of absolute determination. The first envelope contained the emergency ex parte orders, freezing every financial account connected to Madison and Brenda. The second contained the massive civil lawsuits for federal wire fraud, real estate forgery, and corporate embezzlement. The third envelope contained the official bank foreclosure notices for my childhood home. The final envelope contained the brutal divorce papers, severing Marcus completely from the woman who had tried to destroy his commercial empire. Marcus briefed the team with military precision. He handed them a secure digital tablet displaying the exact floor plan of the hotel ballroom. He pointed out the main stage, the private VIP tables, and the specific security checkpoints. He handed them the GPS coordinates of the venue and synchronized their digital watches. He gave them strict, explicit instructions on exactly how and when the papers were to be served. They were not to approach Madison or Brenda during the cocktail hour. They were instructed to wait until the absolute peak of the evening. They had to wait until Madison walked up to the main stage and stood in front of the microphone to deliver her keynote speech. That was the exact moment Marcus wanted them to step out of the shadows and surround the stage. He wanted the service to be a massive, inescapable public spectacle. He wanted every single investor and local politician to witness the exact moment the fake influencer empire completely collapsed. The lead process server, a tall, intimidating man in a sharp tuxedo, nodded silently and tucked the heavy manila envelopes into his tailored jacket. The trap was locked. I stood in my living room, looking out the window at the city skyline. The golden hour light caught the silver face of my watch. It was exactly 5 o'clock in the evening. The gala was scheduled to begin at 7. My trusted neighbor knocked softly on the front door, arriving early to watch Leo for the night. I opened the door and smiled at her, thanking her profusely for her help. I walked into the bedroom and kissed my son gently on his forehead while he played with his toy blocks on the rug. I promised him I would be home early the next morning and that we were going to have a wonderful, peaceful Sunday together. He smiled up at me, his breathing completely normal and his cheeks flushed with healthy color. Looking at him filled me with a fierce, protective warmth. I was burning my toxic family tree to the ground so he would never have to live under the dark shadow of their extortion and their lies. I grabbed my heavy leather tote bag. It contained only the printed forensic audit ledgers bound in thick black presentation folders. These were the exact documents I would drop on their table when the time came. I walked out of my apartment and took the elevator down to the underground parking garage. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete. I got into my car and started the engine, listening to the low, steady hum of the motor. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the most exclusive hotel in the city. The beautiful Saturday morning had transitioned into a cool, crisp evening. The dominoes had been painstakingly lined up one by one over the last 72 hours. The forged wire transfers, the illegal second mortgage, the corporate embezzlement, the fake apology dinner, and the secret audio confession. Everything was perfectly balanced, just waiting for the final push. I drove toward the glowing lights of the hotel ballroom, feeling absolutely no fear and zero remorse. Madison and Brenda thought they were walking into the greatest night of their lives. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into a bloodbath. I tightened my grip on the leather steering wheel and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. I was a mother defending her child and an auditor executing a strike, and I was completely ready for war. I pulled my car into the circular driveway of the Grand Hotel, located in the absolute center of the downtown financial district. I handed my keys to a young valet, smoothed the front of my tailored black auditing suit, and walked through the massive revolving glass doors. The lobby smelled of expensive floral arrangements and old money. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. I followed the elegant gold signs pointing toward the grand ballroom where Marcus was hosting his commercial real estate charity gala. I gripped the heavy black presentation folders in my leather tote bag and stepped through the double doors. The ballroom was breathtaking. There were towering centerpieces of white roses on dozens of tables draped in heavy silver linens. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos navigated silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne. This was the exact world my mother and my sister desperately wanted to conquer. Madison and Brenda were holding court near the edge of the polished wooden dance floor. Madison was wearing her ridiculous $5,000 couture gown. It was a shimmering, floor-length dress covered in intricate beadwork that caught the light with every single movement she made. She was laughing loudly, throwing her head back to make sure everyone noticed her presence. Brenda stood right beside her, wearing a conservative but incredibly expensive navy blue evening gown, dripping in diamonds she had undoubtedly bought with my stolen money. They were surrounded by a group of local politicians, playing the perfect roles of the successful chief executive officer and the proud, supportive mother. I took a deep breath and walked directly toward them. My sharp black suit stood in stark contrast to the sea of colorful, extravagant dresses. I looked like an executioner walking through a carnival. Madison spotted me when I was 20 feet away. The fake bright smile on her face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic that quickly morphed into vicious anger. She aggressively whispered something to Brenda, who spun around to look at me, her eyes widening in absolute horror. Madison excused herself from the group of politicians and marched directly toward me, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Brenda followed closely behind her, looking around frantically. Madison grabbed my arm and physically dragged me behind a large decorative pillar, away from the prying eyes of her new wealthy friends. "What on earth are you doing here?" Harper, Madison hissed, her voice trembling with raw venom. "You are absolutely not invited to this event. You look like a miserable funeral director in that cheap suit." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm and then looked directly into her eyes. I let a long, silent moment pass. "I am here to attend the gala, Madison," I said calmly, pulling my arm out of her grasp. "I wanted to see you give your big speech tonight." Brenda stepped forward, her face flushed dark red with anger. "You need to leave right this second," Brenda commanded in a harsh whisper. "We have your signed quitclaim deed at home and our business is concluded. Get out before we have you thrown out." I did not move a single muscle. Madison turned around and frantically waved her hand at two large security guards dressed in dark suits standing near the ballroom entrance. The guards immediately walked over, noticing the intense hostility. "Gentlemen," Madison said, adopting a loud, authoritative tone that dripped with fake upper-class condescension. "This woman is not on the guest list. She is just some disgruntled hired help from my husband's office trying to cause a massive scene. Please escort her out the back service doors immediately. The hired help belongs in the back." The two large guards stepped forward, reaching out to grab my shoulders. I did not flinch, before the guards could even touch my jacket. A deep booming voice echoed over the loud chatter of the ballroom. "Stop right there," Marcus commanded. Marcus strode across the floor looking absolutely magnificent in a tailored black tuxedo. He carried an aura of absolute, undeniable power. The security guards immediately backed away, apologizing profusely and lowering their heads in deep respect. Marcus stopped right next to me, completely ignoring his wife and his mother-in-law. He turned to the guards and spoke in a clear, loud voice that carried across the surrounding tables. "This woman is Harper, my sister-in-law," he announced, making sure the nearby politicians and elite investors could hear every single word. "She is a highly respected senior financial auditor, and she is my personal guest of honor tonight. You will treat her with the exact same respect you would show me. Do you understand?" The guards nodded rapidly and quickly retreated to their posts. Madison stood frozen in her $5,000 dress, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. Brenda looked like she was about to physically pass out. Marcus finally turned his dark, cold eyes toward his wife. His expression was absolutely terrifying in its blankness. "Madison," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "you should go prepare for your speech. The investors are waiting." He placed a gentle, respectful hand on my back and guided me away from the decorative pillar. "Come with me," Harper, Marcus said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "I have reserved the absolute best seat in the house for you." We bypassed all the standard tables and walked directly to the center VIP section, located directly in front of the main stage. He pulled out a velvet chair right next to the city mayor and motioned for me to sit down. I took my seat and placed my heavy black presentation folders right on top of the silver table linen. I looked back across the room and saw Madison and Brenda standing alone by the pillar, staring at me with expressions of pure trapped terror. They could not scream. They could not run. They could not cause a scene in front of the local elite. They were completely paralyzed by their own desperate need to maintain their fake public image. The trap was perfectly sealed. I smiled a small, cold smile and settled into my chair, waiting for the ultimate show to begin. The extravagant dinner service slowly came to an end. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos cleared the silver plates and poured the final rounds of expensive espresso and dark after-dinner liqueurs. A soft melodic jazz band played quietly in the background, creating an atmosphere of absolute luxury and relaxed wealth. I sat in my velvet chair at the center VIP table, sipping sparkling water and observing the massive room. From my vantage point, directly in front of the main stage, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of my mother and my sister. They had spent the entire last hour pretending I did not exist. Madison was forcing bright, enthusiastic smiles at the wealthy local investors seated around her table, but her eyes kept darting nervously toward my position. Brenda looked physically ill, pushing her food around her porcelain plate and constantly checking her expensive diamond watch. They were trapped in their own superficial performance, unable to flee the venue without drawing massive public suspicion. Suddenly, the soft jazz music faded away into silence. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the clear acrylic podium on the main stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his deep voice echoing smoothly through the grand ballroom. "Tonight, we are celebrating the incredible commercial developments that shape the skyline of our beautiful city. But we are also here tonight to celebrate the bright, entrepreneurial spirit that drives our local economy forward into the future. Please welcome to the stage the founder and chief executive officer of our premier luxury lifestyle marketing agency, Madison Sterling." A polite wave of applause rippled through the massive room. Madison stood up, eagerly smoothing the front of her shimmering $5,000 couture gown. She took a deep, calming breath, pasting on a mask of radiant confidence, and walked gracefully toward the stage. She climbed the carpeted stairs and stood proudly behind the acrylic podium, looking out over the sea of 400 wealthy guests. The bright stage spotlights illuminated the heavy beadwork on her dress, making her look like a sparkling, expensive illusion. She gripped the edges of the podium and leaned into the microphone. "Thank you." Madison began, her voice perfectly modulated to sound sweet, humble, and deeply professional. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight. When I first envisioned creating my own luxury marketing agency, I knew I was taking a massive personal risk. The business world is fiercely competitive, and it is so incredibly easy to fail. But I did not build this company entirely on my own. I built it on the unbreakable foundation of family." She paused dramatically, letting the saccharine words hang in the warm air of the ballroom. She looked directly at Brenda, who offered a weak, trembling smile in return. "My mother, Brenda, taught me the absolute true meaning of sacrifice." Madison continued, placing a delicate hand over her heart. "She taught me that when you love someone, you do absolutely everything in your power to help them succeed. You give them the essential resources they need to build their dreams, even when it requires making incredibly difficult personal choices." I sat in the front row, listening to her breathtaking hypocrisy. Every single word she spoke was a meticulously crafted lie designed to solicit lucrative investments from the millionaires sitting right beside me. When she spoke of her mother's sacrifice, she was actually talking about my mother forging my signature on a federal banking document to steal my emergency medical savings while my son was suffocating in a hospital bed. When she spoke of providing essential resources, she was referring to the illegal $350,000 commercial mortgage they secretly strapped to my childhood home. She was standing under the brightest lights in the city, using the catastrophic financial ruin of her own sister as a heartwarming corporate origin story. It was pure, unadulterated sociopathy, dressed up in a designer gown. Madison shifted her gaze toward the side of the stage where her husband Marcus was standing quietly in the dark shadows. "And of course, I have to take a moment to thank my brilliant husband Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with fake adoration and marital devotion. "Marcus, you are my absolute rock. You taught me the critical importance of corporate integrity. You showed me that a true business legacy is never built on deception or dirty shortcuts. A true legacy is built on absolute family trust. We are building a massive empire together. Marcus and I could never have funded this incredible entrepreneurial journey without your unconditional financial and emotional support." I looked over at Marcus standing in the shadows. He was completely still, his dark eyes locked intensely onto his wife. The muscles in his jaw were clenched so tightly, they looked like carved blocks of granite. He was listening to the woman who had embezzled tens of thousands of dollars from his commercial real estate firm publicly credit him for funding her vanity project. Madison turned back to the audience, flashing her most brilliant practiced smile. So tonight, I invite all of you to join our growing corporate family. She projected her voice rising to an enthusiastic, powerful crescendo. I invite you to invest your time and your capital in a company that values honesty, transparency, and the unbreakable bond of trust above absolutely everything else. Because when you trust the people closest to you, there is absolutely nothing you cannot achieve together. The crowd began to politely clap, but the applause was suddenly cut incredibly short. Marcus stepped out of the dark shadows and began walking slowly and deliberately up the carpeted stage stairs. Madison turned her head to look at him, a confused but compliant smile remaining fixed on her face. She naturally assumed he was coming up to stand right beside her, to play the role of the proud, supportive, wealthy husband for the flashing cameras. But Marcus did not stop beside her. He walked directly up to the clear acrylic podium, standing chest to chest with her. He reached out with his large right hand and firmly wrapped his fingers around the sleek black stem of the microphone. He did not ask for permission, and he did not hesitate. He simply pulled the microphone directly out of her hands with authoritative force. Madison gasped softly, taking a small step back in pure shock as her hands were left grasping empty air. The entire ballroom fell into a sudden, dead, heavy silence. 400 wealthy guests, politicians, and elite investors watched in complete confusion as the powerful real estate developer looked out over the massive crowd. He did not look at his wife standing awkwardly beside him. He raised the microphone slowly to his mouth, his expression colder than ice. "Let us talk about family trust," he said. "Let us talk about family trust." He repeated his deep voice, reverberating off the crystal chandeliers and washing over the 400 wealthy guests in the grand ballroom. My wife Madison just stood up here and delivered a beautiful saccharine speech about how we are building a corporate legacy together. She spoke so passionately about honesty, transparency, and the unbreakable bond we supposedly share. But the absolute truth is that the luxury marketing agency she is pitching to all of you tonight is nothing more than a massive criminal money laundering operation. A collective gasp rippled violently through the audience. Local politicians lowered their expensive champagne glasses, and elite investors shifted uncomfortably in their velvet seats. Madison stood completely frozen next to him, behind the clear acrylic podium, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror, as the polished facade of her entire life began to violently crack and fall apart. For the past 6 months, Marcus continued his tone completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. My wife has been systematically embezzling tens of thousands of dollars from the subsidiary holding accounts of my commercial real estate development firm. She stole from my trusted investors. She stole from the hardworking construction crews who pour the concrete and build this city from the ground up. And she used that stolen corporate capital to fund her lavish fake lifestyle, to buy the ridiculous $5,000 couture dress she is wearing right now, and to secretly pay off the massive underground casino gambling debts accrued by her mother, Brenda. The massive room went completely dead silent. The silence was so incredibly heavy and absolute that I could hear the faint rhythmic hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Brenda let out a strangled, pathetic whimpering sound from her prime table, but nobody moved a single inch to comfort her. The wealthy socialites she had been desperately trying to impress for years were now staring at her with unmasked disgust. Marcus turned slightly to look directly into his wife's terrified eyes. "You did not build a business, Madison," he stated coldly, his voice slicing through the heavy tension like a surgical blade. "You built a parasitic fraud that feeds on the innocent. And you foolishly dragged my pristine professional reputation into the dirt to do it. So effective immediately, I am resigning as your husband, and I am officially filing for a highly contested divorce on the grounds of catastrophic financial infidelity and massive corporate embezzlement." Marcus dropped the microphone directly onto the acrylic podium. The loud electronic thud echoed through the silent ballroom like a fatal gunshot. He walked down the carpeted stairs, ignoring her entirely, and disappeared back into the dark shadows near the exit doors. The crowd remained entirely paralyzed in pure shock. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. The emotional warfare was officially over, and the physical execution had finally arrived. I pushed my velvet chair back and stood up from the center VIP table. I picked up my heavy leather tote bag and walked slowly and deliberately across the polished wooden dance floor toward the table where Brenda and Madison were sitting. Every single pair of eyes in that massive, opulent room tracked my movement. The city mayor watched me with wide, fascinated eyes. The elite guests parted slightly to let me pass, creating a clear, physical path of absolute destruction. I reached their table and stopped. Madison had stumbled down from the stage and collapsed violently into her chair, her face completely drained of all color. She was hyperventilating her chest, heaving rapidly, as she desperately tried to process the sudden total annihilation of her marriage, her finances, and her entire social standing. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the 3 massive black presentation folders. I raised them up slightly to ensure everyone in the room could see exactly what they were, and then I slammed them down onto the silver table linen right next to her half-eaten prime rib. The heavy, sharp smack of the binders hitting the solid wood sounded like a gavel falling in a courtroom, making Brenda physically flinch and cover her face with her trembling hands. Those are the complete forensic audit ledgers. I said, my voice perfectly calm level and carrying easily in the dead quiet room. They detail every single fraudulent bank wire, every fake vendor invoice, and every single stolen penny you funneled from your husband to cover up your federal crimes. You honestly thought you could completely destroy my financial life, threaten to steal my innocent child, and easily hide the digital evidence. But you arrogantly forgot that I track down corporate thieves and dismantle complex financial webs for a living. I am a senior auditor, Madison, and you just gave me the easiest audit of my entire career. As soon as the heavy black binders hit the table, the 5 plainclothes process servers stepped flawlessly out of the surrounding shadows. They moved with terrifying military precision, converging on the table from different angles, so there was absolutely no physical avenue for escape. The lead server, a tall, incredibly imposing man wearing a sharp, expensive tuxedo, stepped directly between Madison and the local politicians seated nearby, completely isolating her from the rest of the room. Madison Sterling, he said, his voice flat, cold, and legally authoritative. You have been officially served. He dropped a massive stack of thick legal documents directly onto her lap, crushing the delicate, shimmering fabric of her expensive gown. These are the emergency ex parte orders signed by a private judge. Just 3 short hours ago, he announced loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single devastating word. All of your personal and corporate bank accounts are currently frozen solid. Your platinum credit cards have been permanently canceled. You have absolutely zero access to any financial assets. He dropped a second heavy manila envelope on top of the first. And these are the official divorce filings and the civil lawsuits for federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The lead server then turned his cold, calculating gaze toward my mother. Brenda Carver, he said, dropping a third massive stack of thick papers directly onto her porcelain dinner plate, shattering her crystal wine glass in the process. You have also been officially served. These are the massive civil lawsuits detailing your federal bank fraud and the illegal forgery of real estate documents. Furthermore, this is the official foreclosure notice from your private commercial lender. Because your daughter no longer has access to stolen corporate funds to pay the massive predatory monthly premiums on the $350,000 mortgage you secretly strapped to my childhood home, the private bank is seizing the property immediately. You are both entirely bankrupt. The servers nodded silently to each other and melted seamlessly back into the stunned crowd, leaving my mother and my sister completely buried under a mountain of devastating legal consequences. The sheer crushing weight of the documents physically pinned Madison to her chair. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them could speak. They just stared blindly at the massive stacks of paper, realizing that their entire world had just been completely incinerated in front of the most powerful people in the city. But Madison's massive, vain ego simply refused to die quietly. She suddenly pushed the heavy papers off her lap, letting them spill aggressively onto the carpeted floor. She jumped up from her chair, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. "She is lying!" Madison screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch that echoed horribly through the grand ballroom. "She is completely lying to all of you. Do not listen to her. She is just my jealous, broke, miserable sister. She is making all of this up because she hates how successful I am. There is no proof of any forgery. There is no proof of any fraud. It is all a pathetic, desperate lie." The wealthy guests murmured nervously, unsure of who to believe in this sudden, chaotic public spectacle. Madison was counting on the fact that these people naturally distrusted dramatic public accusations. She was counting on her ability to manipulate the narrative one last time. But I had prepared for this exact desperate moment. I did not yell back. I did not defend myself. I simply reached into my suit pocket and pulled out my smartphone. Marcus had given the hotel audio-visual team extremely specific instructions earlier that afternoon. My phone was already fully synced to the massive Bluetooth speaker system that controlled the audio for the entire ballroom. I unlocked the bright screen, opened my secure audio files, and tapped the play button on the recording from our fake apology dinner. The crystal-clear high-definition audio blasted through the massive professional speakers, filling every single corner of the enormous grand ballroom with the undeniable truth. I heard my own fake trembling voice asking why they had forged my name on the bank wire instead of just asking me. And then Madison's arrogant, smug voice boomed across the venue for 400 elite guests to hear. "Because you would have said no, Harper, and besides, Mom knew my signature looks just like yours." It was incredibly easy. I logged into the bank portal from my laptop, authorized the transfer, and Mom just scribbled your name on the physical paper at the branch. Then Brenda's voice echoed powerfully through the speakers, casually admitting to corrupting a state-licensed notary. Patricia owed me a massive favor anyway. She stamped the official deed of trust and swore she watched you sign it. Nobody is ever going to check it, Harper. The entire ballroom erupted into an absolute frenzy of audible gasps, shocked whispers, and disgusted groans. The absolute, undeniable proof was literally echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Madison slowly collapsed back into her chair, covering her ears with her hands and sobbing hysterically as her own recorded voice continued to casually confess to federal felonies. Brenda buried her face in the table, completely defeated. I stood over them, watching their perfect artificial empire burn down to the absolute ashes. The hammer had officially dropped, and the execution was a total success. The last echo of my mother's recorded voice faded into the heavy velvet curtains of the grand ballroom. The absolute silence that followed was completely deafening. 400 of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city were paralyzed, staring at the table, where the illusion of the perfect family had just been violently shattered. Before the crowd could even begin to process the sheer magnitude of the public confession, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung wide open. A team of 6 serious-looking men and women walked purposefully into the room. They were not wearing expensive tuxedos or designer evening gowns. They were dressed in sharp, practical suits, and their polished silver badges hung clearly from lanyards around their necks. Marcus had perfectly timed their arrival. He had tipped off the Federal White-Collar Crime Division hours ago, ensuring they were waiting right in the hotel lobby for the exact moment the audio confession was played. The detectives moved through the parted sea of elite guests with absolute authority, their eyes locked directly onto our table. My mother Brenda saw them approaching, and the last remaining color drained entirely from her face. She tried to stand up, but her legs completely gave out beneath her, causing her to fall back into her velvet chair. The lead detective, a stern woman with sharp features, stopped right in front of Brenda. She did not lower her voice or attempt to handle the situation with any quiet discretion. Brenda Carver, the detective, stated, her voice cutting through the silent room like a blade. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud and criminal conspiracy to commit real estate forgery. Because the stolen funds from the forged bank wire were transmitted across state lines to a vendor in New York, your actions constitute a severe federal offense. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Brenda began to violently shake. She looked around the surrounding tables, frantically searching for a single sympathetic face. She looked at the mayor, she looked at her wealthy tennis partners, and she looked at the elite country club wives she had spent decades trying to impress, but they all physically recoiled from her, pulling their expensive silk dresses away, as if her criminal corruption was a contagious disease. Nobody stepped forward to defend her. Nobody offered to call their expensive lawyers. She was instantly and permanently exiled from the only society she cared about. "Please," Brenda whimpered, her voice barely a raspy whisper. "Please do not do this here. Not in front of my friends. I will come with you quietly." The detective did not show a single ounce of pity. "You gave up your right to discretion when you forged federal documents to steal from your own daughter," the detective replied coldly. "Stand up now, or we will physically force you up." Brenda slowly pushed herself up from the table, tears streaming rapidly down her heavily powdered face, ruining her expensive makeup. The detective firmly grabbed Brenda's wrists, pulled them behind her back, and secured the heavy steel handcuffs. The loud metallic click of the locking mechanism echoed sharply over the quiet background jazz music. It was the absolute sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The detectives flanked my mother on all sides and began to march her slowly toward the ballroom exit. It was the ultimate walk of shame. 400 pairs of judging eyes watched the wealthy suburban socialite being paraded out of the luxury gala in federal handcuffs, her pristine reputation permanently destroyed. I turned my attention back to my sister. Madison was no longer sitting in her chair. The sheer overwhelming gravity of her absolute ruin had physically driven her to the ground. She was sitting on the polished hardwood floor, surrounded by the spilled legal documents, the civil lawsuits, the eviction notices, and the divorce papers. The shimmering beads on her $5,000 couture gown scraped against the floor as she rocked back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably. Her mind was finally grasping the absolute finality of her situation. She was not leaving this hotel to return to a sprawling suburban estate. She was not going to wake up tomorrow and play the role of a wealthy corporate chief executive officer. Her digital access was completely blocked. Her platinum credit cards were currently declining at every terminal. Her loving, powerful husband had publicly abandoned her and handed her directly to the authorities. She was entirely bankrupt, facing massive civil litigation and inevitable federal indictment. She looked up at me from the floor, her face contorted in pure pathetic agony. "Harper," she choked out, reaching a trembling hand up toward my knees. "Please, you have to stop this. You are my sister. You cannot just leave me here with absolutely nothing. I have nothing left." I looked down at the woman who had happily drained my life savings while my 5-year-old son was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. I looked at the woman who had explicitly threatened to call Child Protective Services to steal my boy just to cover up her massive financial crimes. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no lingering sibling obligation. The biological tie between us had been permanently severed the second she chose her vanity over my child's safety. "You have exactly what you deserve, Madison," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You built your entire life on a foundation of stolen money and arrogant lies. Now, you get to sit in the wreckage and pay the bill." I reached down and picked up my leather tote bag, ensuring my laptop and my secure files were safely inside. I turned my back on her, leaving her sobbing violently on the floor of the grand ballroom. I walked confidently toward the main exit doors. The massive crowd of wealthy guests, politicians, and elite investors immediately parted to let me through. They looked at me with a mixture of profound shock and deep, terrified respect. I did not lower my head. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders squared and my high heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor of the lobby. I walked past the grand crystal chandeliers, past the expensive floral arrangements, and pushed through the heavy, revolving glass doors. I stepped out of the luxury hotel and out into the quiet city street. The cool night air rushed over my face, instantly clearing away the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the gala. I took a massive, deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, clean air. The crushing, terrifying weight of financial ruin that had burdened me all week was entirely gone. I looked up at the dark night sky, feeling a profound, radiant sense of absolute victory. I had protected my son, I had defended my home, and I had completely annihilated the monsters hiding in my own family. I smiled a genuine, beautiful smile and began the peaceful walk back to my car. 3 months have passed since the night the Grand Hotel Ballroom became the permanent graveyard of my family and their toxic empire. The American legal system generally moves incredibly slow for most people, but when you hand federal prosecutors a high-definition audio confession wrapped in a neat bow with perfectly cloned digital ledgers, the wheels of justice spin with a terrifying, unstoppable speed. My mother, Brenda, did not even attempt to fight the massive charges in court. Her expensive country club friends and wealthy socialite tennis partners completely abandoned her the exact moment the heavy steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists at the charity gala. Without any access to Madison's stolen corporate funds, Brenda could not afford to hire a high-powered defense attorney to manipulate the system. Instead, she was assigned a severely overworked public defender who took one single look at the mountain of undeniable digital evidence and strongly advised her to surrender immediately. To avoid spending the last decade of her natural life locked inside a federal penitentiary, Brenda accepted a brutal and unforgiving plea deal. She was placed on strict federal house arrest for the next 5 long years, because she was forced to declare complete and total bankruptcy to satisfy the government fines. She no longer lives in a sprawling suburban estate. She was permanently relocated to a tiny, cramped, government-subsidized apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. She wears a thick black electronic ankle monitor that tracks her every single movement 24 hours a day. She spends her long, quiet days sitting entirely alone in a small, dim room watching daytime television because she is not legally allowed to leave the premises except for highly monitored and pre-approved medical appointments. The arrogant woman who once valued her pristine social image above the life of her own grandson is now nothing more than a convicted felon living in absolute total isolation. My younger sister Madison faced an equally devastating and humiliating reality. When Marcus officially filed the aggressive divorce papers and handed the massive embezzlement evidence directly over to the federal authorities, Madison's fake luxury marketing agency imploded overnight. She desperately tried to leverage her remaining social media followers to launch a pathetic victim campaign online, claiming she was unfairly framed by her cruel, powerful husband and her jealous, bitter sister. But the local city news outlets had already picked up the sensational story of the dramatic gala arrest and the massive corporate fraud. Her supposed luxury brand partnerships evaporated instantly, leaving her entirely exposed. Because Marcus had an ironclad prenuptial agreement and absolute undeniable proof of her catastrophic financial infidelity, she walked away from the 3-year marriage with absolutely nothing. She did not get any spousal support. She did not keep the luxury cars. She did not get a single penny of his massive commercial real estate fortune. Today, the deeply vain woman who once wore a $5,000 couture gown to publicly mock my desperate financial struggles is currently living in a cramped, humid studio apartment in a highly undesirable and noisy neighborhood. To pay off her massive court-mandated restitution fees, Madison was forced to get a grueling minimum wage job working the cash register at a local discount retail clothing store. Every single day, she has to stand on her exhausted feet for 8 long hours folding cheap generic garments and dealing with incredibly rude customers while wearing a poorly fitted polyester uniform. There are absolutely no more private spa days. There are no more expensive imported champagne towers. Her massive, towering ego was completely pulverized by the brutal, unforgiving reality of the working-class life she used to openly and cruelly despise. As for me, my life transformed into something incredibly peaceful and profoundly beautiful. With the expert help of the forensic fraud investigator and my own meticulous professional documentation, I filed a massive civil lawsuit against my mother and my sister regarding the illegal second mortgage. Because the commercial deed of trust was legally proven to be a forged fraudulent document, the state courts completely invalidated the massive predatory loan. But I did not simply stop there. I successfully sued for total and complete ownership of my childhood home, successfully arguing that Brenda's deliberate criminal actions permanently forfeited her legal right to the property equity my father had left behind. The presiding judge agreed with my legal team entirely. I was legally awarded 100% ownership of the sprawling suburban property. I immediately put the large house on the real estate market and successfully sold it to a lovely young family for top dollar. I took every single penny from that massive lucrative sale and placed it directly into a pristine, ironclad trust fund for my son Leo. My beautiful 5-year-old boy will never have to worry about expensive college tuition or devastating emergency medical bills ever again. His long-term financial future is completely bulletproof. The profound, terrifying anxiety that used to keep me awake late at night has entirely vanished from my mind. Furthermore, Marcus and I remained excellent friends after the heavy dust of the legal explosions finally settled. We deeply bonded over the shared trauma of being terribly betrayed by the exact same toxic family, and we formed an unbreakable alliance built on mutual respect and absolute honesty. Marcus frequently comes over to our new bright apartment for quiet Sunday dinners. He has wonderfully stepped into the role of a highly supportive and protective uncle figure for Leo. They spend hours playing with wooden building blocks on the living room rug, while I cook dinner in the kitchen. Marcus even promised to teach Leo exactly how to read commercial architectural blueprints when he gets a little older. I sit on my comfortable couch watching them laugh together, and I realize that the family you consciously choose is always infinitely stronger than the family you are simply born into. The terrible dark storm is finally over, and we did not just survive it. We are thriving in the bright, warm light that followed. When I look back on everything that happened over those chaotic and terrifying weeks, I realize something incredibly profound about the concept of family. Society constantly tells us that blood is thicker than water. We are taught from a very young age that we must forgive our parents and our siblings no matter what they do to us, simply because we share the same DNA. But that is a dangerous and toxic lie. The title of family is not a free license to exploit the people who love you. It is not a blank check to steal, to manipulate, or to cause intentional harm. The title of family is an absolute obligation to protect one another. When my mother and my sister decided to use my life savings to fund a fake internet lifestyle, while my 5-year-old son was literally fighting for his breath in an emergency room, they permanently forfeited their right to call themselves my family. They chose their own massive egos and their ridiculous vanity over the safety of a helpless child. So I made my own choice. I chose to protect my innocent son over protecting the very women who abused me. I chose to be a real mother instead of being a compliant and silent victim. Stepping out of the toxic shadow they cast over my entire life was the hardest and most terrifying thing I have ever done. But standing in the bright, warm light on the other side of that nightmare, I can honestly say it was the most liberating decision I will ever make in my life. I am no longer the exhausted woman, trembling in a hospital hallway begging for scraps of basic human decency. I am a fierce protector of my own peace, and I have built a secure fortress of love and absolute financial security for my beautiful boy. Do not let anyone ever tell you that setting strict boundaries is an act of betrayal. Walking away from people who consistently disrespect your worth and actively harm your mental health is the highest form of self-respect. You do not owe your life or your sanity to the people who brought you into this world if they treat your existence like a burden or an endless resource to be drained. If my story helped you realize your own true worth and gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach other people who might desperately need to hear them today. And please tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect yourself and your children? What time is it where you are right now as you listen to this video? Remember, you write your own story and nobody else gets to hold the pen. Take good care of your beautiful self, and I will see you in the next one.